My name is Michael Andrew. I'm going to be your host and instructor for about the next 2 hours, depending on your playback speed. And I just want to give you some words of encouragement. I remember when I got started in 2003, it was a Canon 10D. It took me 2 years to learn my camera. I have primarily been shooting Canon ever since. So I'm about to cram almost 23 years of Canon knowledge into this video. So you're going to save yourself a ton of time and frustration. Be patient with yourself. I got you. This is going to be very straightforward if you watch what I show you carefully. For those of you who want to jump around to different chapters, if you hit Command F or Control F, depending on the computer you have, type in the topic that you're interested in. If we have a chapter marker for it, it will highlight, and then you can jump straight to that chapter. Another tip is that when you finish a section, type in the time code of where you finish, so when you return, you'll be able to see exactly where to pick up. Another thing you can do is the playback speed. If I'm speaking too slow or too fast, you can adjust that speed by clicking on the gear icon. And we also have a great resource on Facebook in the Facebook R6 Mark III Facebook group. We'd love to see you there. If you enjoy my teaching style and are looking for more training, including the basics as well as advanced real-world shooting, we have a full crash course on the R6 Mark II and the R6 Mark III. These cameras are 98% identical in their operation, and this course is already available. Check the link in the description to learn more. Check out Maven filters. This is a company that I created. These are patented, color-coded, awesome filters. I will put that link in the description. Without further ado, let's get started. There's a famous saying that the poor man pays twice. That saying basically means is that if you buy really inexpensive gear, oftentimes you have to rebuy it. So the advice I give to all of my students is buy the best gear that you can afford at the time. There are tons of great companies out there. Just do your research and find something that's quality and is going to last. These have lasted me over 10 years. I have multiple sets of them. But another thing that people don't know about the Bogen Manfrotto tripods is that they sell the parts. So when it does finally break, you can order the part, replace the part, and continue to use it. I use the 496 RC2 ball head. I like it because it has a locking mechanism. There's a newer version of this called the X Pro. And the plate that I use is the 200, I think it's called 200L 14 plate. I prefer those over the Arca Swiss. Just my preference because it has a number of mechanisms that lock it into the tripod. Arca Swiss is more of a sliding mechanism. It really comes down to preference. But again, if you buy quality, it's going to last a lot longer. There's tons of garbage. So our camera mount on the bottom is a 1/4 inch 20. There are slightly larger threads that you're going to see on some tripods, and there's adapter rings for a 3/8 mount. But again, this is the 200PL14. This is the one that I like. You'll notice it tells us to mount it towards the front of the lens. So we're just going to put that on real quick. This is what it should look like. Something like that. And then when I'm ready, I'm going to drop the front of this in here and push it down. And there's this locking lever in the back that really locks the camera. I mean, it is not going to go anywhere. You'll notice this little notch here on the camera cover. That will correspond to this red mark underneath, which is the lens alignment. And something I'll do is I'll take a silver Sharpie and I'll just go over that a little bit. Makes it a lot easier to see when you're fumbling with things in dark places and want to just know where things line up. So these red tick marks are going to line up. You rotate till it clicks. To take it off, we're going to push, hold down, rotate till it comes off, and then it pops off again. Something else I want to point out is that we live in a microbe world, meaning there's particles and dust and things that we just cannot see constantly around us. So my advice to beginning photographers is to always try to keep your camera covered. If you need to change your lens outside, what I would recommend is changing this facing down. So holding the camera down, you would undo this cover and then you put the lens on as fast as possible. And there are some environments I would say you may want to even wait, because if it's windy and you're on a beach, for example, there's lots of sand blowing around. I personally would be very nervous about changing my camera in a sandy condition. So just keep this in mind. We always want to keep the camera covered. We always want to keep the back of the lens covered if we can help it. Real quick, talking about the new LPE6P battery. It's the same size and shape as previous LPE6 batteries. Just know that this is optimized for maximum power. If you read the very, very fine print, you'll see this has higher voltage, which allows the camera to do higher performance types of things. You can use older batteries in it, but it's not going to maximize the camera's capabilities. So something else I want to point out is you'll notice this little lever here. We can pop this off. This is useful if you're putting on different types of grips. When we are talking about memory cards, there's two different slots. There's a CF Express B, and then we have our standard SD memory card slot. When we are recording video or when we're shooting, think of it as a cup being filled up with water. As you're filling up the camera's buffer with different types of data, depending on the shooting that we're doing, that cup is going to fill up faster or slower, depending on what we are doing. But in order to stay into the action, the camera has to empty that cup of water. If the cup fills up, the camera will turn off. Let's say you're shooting JPEGs and you're shooting a high-speed burst, you may not fill it up. If you're shooting uncompressed RAW files at 40 frames per second, it's going to fill up faster. So in order to stay back into the action, we want to have fast memory cards that can unload that data. The right speed of the memory cards will limit the camera depending on these write speeds. There is some nomenclature we're going to go into in just a second. Needs its own video, really. Suffice it to say the CF Express B cards are going to be way faster than your SD memory cards, but your SD memory cards are quite capable in terms of what you're doing if you have the right ones. It's not like going to Walmart and buying one of these. The SD memory cards, there's thousands of them in the same size and shape, but they have different performances. What I always recommend is get the biggest, fastest memory card that you can afford, starting off with your CF Express B. The R6 Mark II had 2 SD card memory slots, and this is significant. We saw this on the R5 models, and it's because the camera has abilities that require faster memory. Let's talk about our SD memory cards. There's some things in here that I really want to point out. Obviously, the larger number in red, this is how much space or storage you have on the card. But even though they're the same size and same basic shape, there are some differences here. So when I turn these around, you can see this is a UHS 1 card, and this is a UHS 2 card. The 2 card will have 2 rows of pins. These are generally much faster, and they can write much faster, and they're usually more expensive. On the front, the red number is the amount of storage that we have, 128 gigabytes versus 512 gigabytes. And then you're going to start noticing these little symbols here, V90 and V30. There's also these little circles with numbers and little U's. So these are all different minimum write speeds, the classifications of these memory cards. How fast can they write? How fast can they clear the buffer? Started off with these guys, the circles with the 10. U3 is the minimum write speed for 4K video. And then we have a V30 and a V90. This stands for video sustained, minimum sustained write speed. So V30 is 30 megabytes per second. V90 is 90 megabytes per second. So the minimum 4K video standard is class U3, but if you are shooting in higher bit rates or higher frame rates, if there's more data, then you are going to want to maximize your V class, in this case, V90. So this is the one I'm going to throw into the camera. Even though it has a smaller amount of space, the speed is going to be better for the R6 Mark III. When we get into the menu systems, probably in a separate video, we'll talk about managing or designating which memory card we're using for what purpose. Just remember, if you ever do any 7K, you're going to want the CF Express B. If you do very high frame rate sport shooting, probably the same. It'll allow you to clear your buffer faster, but the SD memory card for general shooting and even 4K video is quite capable. So the very first time we turn the camera on, and we'll do a button overview here in a minute, obviously we're going to want to select the language. Hope you're an English speaker. Now we have a password lock. You'll also notice that we have this touch screen. In this case, I'm going to go 6 5s for now. Going to hit OK. Before using the camera, set a password. It's all 5s. Wants me to put these all in again. Something you'll notice is that as you move your finger in front of this sensor, it'll turn off the screen. It's a power saving feature. So just keep that in mind. But we have this beautiful touch screen. We can also navigate using big scroll wheel or the joystick. Once we highlight something, it's going to be in orange. Press the set button. We get these up and down arrows. We can push on these guys if we want. Pretty straightforward. We want to get this all set up. Hit OK. We're going to connect the smartphone a little bit later. And then we are finally in the shooting menu. And let's do a quick button overview. So there are a couple controls I want you to be aware of as we're getting started. Obviously, we have the power switch all the way to the right is on. If we don't want our settings to change, we can flip it over to the lock position. Over here, we have our stills versus video mode selector. So if we're shooting video, we'd flip this over. Stills is here. But what I want you to do right now is with your camera turned on, make sure you have it to a stills mode, and just put it on something like P for now on the mode dial. I'll come back to explain these in a second. I want you to play with your shutter button. There are actually two positions on the shutter button. There is a halfway depression, and you can kind of feel this spongy resistance as you push it halfway down. And then to take a picture, you're going to push it all the way down. So what this is the halfway shutter button depression allows you to focus with the camera. There's different ways to set this up, and we'll talk about it in the focusing lesson. But it's important to train your finger to feel the difference between a slight depression and then pushing it all the way into the camera body. I like to call this guy right here your primary selector, because your finger, number one, is going to change the primary setting. You're going to be using this one quite a bit. We have our dedicated video record button to start and stop video recording. Up here, we have something called the MFN button, or the multifunction button. It will pull up a menu of secondary camera settings, things like our white balance. I'll have a separate lesson on this shortly. A couple other things I wanted to point out right here. You see these little holes in the camera. These are your microphones. The set of 4 holes is a speaker. This is our mode dial. Very important. We'll be talking about it in depth. All these letters mean something, and there's different modes you're going to want to shoot in depending on what you're doing. I will have this as its own lesson a little bit later. Underneath the front of the camera, so as we grip the camera near where our pinky would rest, this is the depth of field preview button. It allows us to get a preview of the depth of field by stopping down the lens blades. It can be customized to do different things. I typically use it to change the focusing clusters. I'll talk about that a little bit later. When we're talking about the back of the camera, many of these controls can be tweaked or customized, which I will also show you in a later lesson. As we grip the camera, this is our joystick, 8 different directions, up, down, left, right, into the diagonals. But also you can push it into the camera body as a selector or an enter type of feature. We have a magnifying glass, which will allow us to zoom in on what we're looking at, whether it is during a shooting mode or a playback. We have our info button. We'll toggle through this in just a moment. We have our Q button, which is our quick menu. It allows us to access different secondary menu items. And then this guy here, I like to call the secondary control wheel, because one, index finger is our primary and our thumb is our secondary. We'll be using this quite a bit. The set button is like an enter or select button. We have our playback button if we're going to review images. And then we have our garbage icon when we're going to delete things. We also have our rate button, color. Color allows us to determine whether using picture styles or a color filter. We also have our deep menu button. Something else I just want to point out is that when you see blue colors, this is typically in playback mode of still images, not when you're shooting. So when you're playing an image, the blue items take effect. When we are shooting, it's mostly these white items. Over here on the right, where our thumb would rest, we have an autofocus on button, which engages the camera's focusing systems. So sometimes shooters want to use their thumb versus the halfway shutter button depression. We have our exposure lock, which also acts as a flash exposure lock when we are using a flash. And then we have our cluster selector, which we'll cover in the focusing lesson. A couple other things to point out real quick is we have our diopter adjustment here. It's this little wheel on the side of the viewfinder. The diopter adjustment will focus the lens that looks at this little monitor in here. In DSLRs, we used to look through a mirror that would actually look out the lens. Now we have a little TV monitor to look at. This changes the focus of it. Now, depending on the lens that you have, you're often going to see these kinds of switches here. If it's an image stabilized lens, we can turn that off. And then we also have an autofocus to manual focus. So if you wanted to jump into manual focus real quick, you just flip that over. If your camera is not focusing, check this switch. This often gets bumped. And then we have a number of ports under these gaskets. Let's open these real quick. Obviously, we get a little hint on the outside. This is our microphone input. So if we were recording high quality video and we're using a microphone, we would want to plug the mic into here. We also have the ability to listen to what is being recorded with our headset. If you mix those up, they will not work the way they're supposed to. We have our HDMI out. So if we want to put a video feed out, this is where we'd put it in. And then we also have our USB-C connector, and then we have a remote terminal. So this is mostly for video out. Something you'll notice is that as you turn the camera on, if you haven't set it up, it's going to keep asking you if you want to connect to the Canon Camera Connect app. For now, we're going to hide this, and we're going to hit cancel. So I want to show you how playback works on the camera and using the touch screen. I'm going to take a couple pictures, just of anything, just take some pictures, press play. It doesn't matter what these look like. And you'll notice that we have the ability to zoom in by moving our fingers out. It's a little focusing target. And as I move my fingers together, I get this grid where I can scroll through different images I've taken recently. Let's see here. Take a look at that. This is one of the Maven filters that we've recently released. It's an H alpha. I take a lot of pictures of filters. So the idea is that by touching on the screen and swiping to the left or right, pinching together, we can zoom out and we can look at these grid views of our playback. Here I am again doing another shoot. There's another filter. It's one of our infrareds. Very intuitive to navigate through these and zoom in. So we can shoot. This is the kaleidoscope filter, one of the other ones. I do a lot of filter shooting. So one of our models, testing out the filter. So this is how we navigate through the pictures. When I'm ready to start shooting again, I'm going to tap the shutter button. In between the shutter button and the primary selector, there's a little button there called the multifunction button. This will open up a subset of items. And what I'm doing is I'm toggling this. I'm pushing it repeatedly over and over again, and it's scrolling through those options. On the top, we get the half moon primary selector icon. So I can change those there. And on the bottom, we get the secondary control wheel. So what this is telling us is that we can jump through our menus of these items very quickly. This top row here, let me get my little pointer. We have our white balance. It's currently on custom 1, but you can see as I scroll through there, there's our auto white balance. Auto white balance, metering modes, press it again. Drive modes, focusing mode, push it again. Flash exposure compensation, ISO control, push it again. Picture styles, and then we have our focusing clusters. Obviously, there's other shortcuts we have to get to these, but sometimes it's really super easy. For example, let's say you want to do white balance, or you want to do your drive modes. Then we can come in and change them by rotating the corresponding wheel. Again, primary selector. This is our secondary selector down here, to just jump through those menu items. And that is the MFN button. It's located between the shutter button and the primary control wheel. Searching for filters and then threading them onto your lens wastes time. Maven filters use a patented magnetic system. Snap, stack, shoot. Smarter filters, that's Maven. You can get yours at mavenfilters.com. Let's talk about all the numbers and symbols that we see. It can be very overwhelming the first time, but what I would like for you to do is to get your camera in hand and turn it on, make sure you're in the stills mode, and press the info button. Just keep pressing it over and over again, and what you'll see is the screens will start to cycle over and over again. So we get a lot of questions. Hey, I'm not on the screen that you're on. If there's something confusing about this, this is what's going on, is that the info screen changes the information sets that we have. Another thing I want to point out is there is a little sensor right here, right above the screen here, and this is a battery saver. It's designed so that when you look in to the viewfinder here, that it automatically turns off the monitor on the back. And there is a way to deal with this. So we can come into our yellow tab. It's page 5 out of 8. It's the screen and viewfinder display. It's set to auto 1. So the difference between these two, auto 1 and auto 2, has to deal with what you see in this icon here when the monitor is open and facing you. When it's into the camera and facing you, these behave the same. Basically what it's saying in auto 1, when this is open and facing you, this little switch will not work. It will stay on. I like it this way, but sometimes I do gimbal work, so I'll flip it over to screen. Coming back out, I'm going to tap the shutter button. The easiest way for me to cover all of this is to do it in the black information screen. So I'm going to push the info button until I come back to it. There's 3 sets of numbers you're always going to see. And by the way, let's set it to the M mode. Up here on the mode dial, if you rotate that to M, you'll see the same information as me. These 3 numbers here are critical. You're constantly going to be looking at them. The first one is our shutter speed, which deals with how long the shutter is open, and it is given in fractions. In this instance, 1/60th of a second. The second number deals with our aperture. The aperture is the opening of the lens. It can become bigger or smaller. This is stated in an f value, which is the focal length of the lens divided by the opening in millimeters. It's a ratio. This last number here is our ISO. ISO doesn't really deal with real light entering the lens. It's an artificial boost applied to the sensor. The higher the number, the higher the boost. The lower the number, the lower the boost. This is going to be very important when we talk about exposure a little bit later. These 3 orange symbols, there's an orange top crescent, a circle, and a bottom crescent, deal with the 3 different controls. The first one is our primary selector located just behind the shutter button up here. The second one is what I refer to as the secondary control wheel, which we use our thumb for. And the third one right here, I like to refer to this as the ISO control wheel on the back of the camera. The interesting thing is you're going to see these numbers appear just about everywhere. You're going to see it in the viewfinder on the bottom of the screen often. And if we press the info button, as we cycle through the different sets of information, you will see them appear on the bottom of your screen. Shutter speed, aperture, ISO. Shutter speed, aperture, ISO. Shutter speed, aperture, ISO, right? And in this nothing screen, if you tap the shutter button, we can still see them here on the bottom. So they're obviously very important, and you will be referring to them often. This guy here is in a different mode, like aperture priority or shutter priority or P mode. This is referred to as the exposure compensation bracket. In the manual mode, it looks very similar, but it's more of a metering bracket, which tells you how much light is coming into the camera. Now, something else you'll notice is that sometimes we have boxes that are empty because it's not in that mode or whatever. You'll notice here we have this little Q in the bottom left-hand corner, and we also have a corresponding Q button here. This is the quick menu button, and when we push this, we get this orange highlight. That orange highlight can be moved around by touching on the screen. So there's a number of different ways to change the settings. If we double tap, we can change the shutter speed using this graph on the back. Or if we wanted to change our focusing clusters, we could do it here. Something else you'll notice is that we get this prompt every time we touch on something. And I find this kind of annoying. So what I would recommend is come into your menu, come to your yellow tab, and we're going to find this feature guide and turn it off. I'm going to tap the shutter button again. We're back out. Now when we press the Q button, we don't get these prompts popping up every time we change it. And that orange box is going to go to the selected item. When we go to the selected item, we can also change it by rotating, let's say, our primary selector wheel. We can rotate our ISO control wheel. We can rotate the secondary control wheel. So there's tons of different ways to change these, but let's jump through the rest of these real quick. This is our flash exposure compensation, which deals with changing the flash brightness from the back of the camera. We have our customized controls, which allow us to change how buttons operate. This is our file types in the case of JPEG. We have this smooth JPEG. This deals with compression, and the file size is large. It will also tell us on the bottom the dimensions of the image and the number of shots remaining. If I come to the left, we have our memory card control. This top one is our CF Express B slot, and this bottom one is our SD memory card. And there are ways to configure these to either back each other up or to shoot individually depending on the type of file. This squiggly line are our communication functions like connecting to our smartphone, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, things of that nature. We have image optimization, which is turned off in the manual mode in aperture priority and shutter priority. It will help adjust the contrast. It does it automatically, and you can turn it off. It's just a little bit of processing. I'm gonna come all the way over here. The color mode we're using, picture styles are like recipes that allow us to tell the camera to have more saturation or less saturation. There are also some of these color filters, kind of fun to play with. I don't consider them serious tools. Coming back out. Here we have our color temperature, which deals with our white balance. You'll notice that when I shoot video, I have it dialed in something other than white balance. I'm very specific about it. I'll even tweak the color bracketing depending on how I'm shooting. Video, I don't like tweaking or adjusting. I try to get it right in camera. Probably good advice all the time. Try to get it as right as possible in camera. And then we have our white balance, shift, and bracketing. Come over here and change the color hue. We'll talk about white balance a little bit later. We have our focusing clusters. We have our focusing modes, which we'll talk about shortly. We have our metering modes, which deals with how the camera measures light. We'll talk about this a little bit later. We have our drive modes, which is what the camera does after we push the shutter button down all the way. Whether it's a single shot, a burst, if we hold the shutter button down, or different sets of timers. We'll talk about those later. And I'm going to tap the shutter button to get these last ones. We have our battery life, Wi-Fi connection. We have our electronic shutter. It's currently active. And we have a Bluetooth symbol that is turned off. We have our image stabilization turned off. You can see the hand and it says off. It's because I have the stabilizer switch on the front of the lens here turned off. I'm going to flip this forward. It's going to turn on. This number to the left or right of the bracket deals with the number of shots we have in a buffer. A buffer is sort of like an empty storage space that as we shoot, it fills up as the camera is writing to the memory cards. It's trying to empty them quickly so we can get at least 99 shots on the current settings of smooth, large JPEG. The beauty of this information is that it is found in pretty much all the other screens in different places. I'm going to press the info button. So this is a general shooting screen, not as much information. We still get our very important settings. We can see here the mode that we're in, number of shots remaining, number of shots in the buffer, the amount of video record time. We have our battery life, image stabilization. This guy here that you'll see sometimes is a recentering to jump back to center focus. You can also do it by pushing the joystick into the camera body, just like that. Again, we have our Q button on the monitor, same thing as this guy. We have touch shutter enable. I'm not a huge fan of it because when you bump it, the camera's going to take a picture. So I usually have this turned off. The magnifying glass will allow us to zoom in on the screen. Very useful if you're doing precise focusing, product shooting. I use it a lot in video shooting to know exactly where I'm focusing, typically with manual focusing, so it doesn't change on me. And again, on the bottom, we have our shutter speed, our aperture, and our ISO. I've been doing some fun shooting with the electronic shutter. The electronic shutter is pretty important. We'll come back to it later, but it's on the red tab, 6 out of 10. I'm going to turn it to first. When we have a mechanical second shutter, you'll notice that we get this green icon, and this is what you should have on default when you first get the camera. And then when it's on electronic shutter, we do not see it. 29 deals with the focal length of our lens. So as we change a zoom, it'll tell us what focal length we're using. We have a little Bluetooth icon that's turned off. If we press the info button again, we get a histogram, an electronic level that appears to be off right now. So if I tilt the camera forward, let's say, or I readjust just a little bit, there we go. So these ones on the outside deal with whether it's this way, and the ones on the inside deal with up and down. So as I tilt the camera up, now it's dialed in. Very handy when you're shooting landscape if you want to make sure your camera is even with the horizon. As we continue to press the info button, we get tons of more information, but most of this should be familiar. So when we press the Q button, we're able to access these different items on either side of the camera. We have an orange highlight to let us know which one we've selected, and we have the individual selection items on the bottom. It'll kick you out after a few seconds. Starting on the top left, we have our focusing clusters, we have our focusing modes, we have our file types, we have our drive modes, we have our cropping aspect ratio. For beginners, I typically tell them to keep it on full using the full sensor. Coming over to this other side, we have our anti-flicker shooting. So there's certain kinds of lights that actually flicker, and if this is turned on, the camera will time the exposures between the flickering so they are consistent. Deals with certain types of like sodium-based street lamps, some types of fluorescent lights. Coming down, we have our white balance, should be set there. Picture styles, which are little recipes that control how the final JPEG images are going to look. We have our metering modes and our subject for auto detection. In this case, it's just set to humans. We can turn this off. We'll talk about it when we get into the menu section. Coming back out, some other little items that we see are exposure simulation is turned on. We want to see this little guy. It'll give us a preview of what we're shooting in. Sometimes you'll want to turn it off when you're dealing with flash or studio types of shooting. Now, having gone through these screens, there's something you should be aware of is that when we flip it over to video mode, some of this information is going to change. Now we have a video camera, I have it on manual, and we get this Servo autofocus, which is an autofocus for the camera in video mode, which means it's going to focus continually. We'll talk about this in the focusing lesson. We also have a video record button, and if I continue to press the info screen, this is super important. These audio levels, CH1 and CH2, channel 1, channel 2, left and right. And as I'm speaking, you can see the audio levels coming into the camera. If I were to snap my fingers a couple times, you can see that it'll increase. And what we want to avoid is this getting into the red zone. This is a bad thing. Some of you are looking at the back of your camera and you're saying, hang on a second, I'm not seeing everything that he has. There are two different sets of audio levels. One has a set of headsets, one has a microphone. Now, to further complicate things, when you come into the deep menu by pressing the menu button, the items that you see in here will be different than if we were on a stills mode and press the menu button. So keep this in mind. Watch, I'll flip it to video, it kicks us out, I press it again. Different sets of information. A lot of times I get emails, hey, I don't see what you see. It's because it depends on what mode you're in. To further complicate this, the mode dial also comes into play. So I'm gonna come back to stills, I'm on manual mode. Look at all these tabs we have here at the top. Now I'm gonna rotate this to dummy mode, the green mode. Let's see here. Press the menu. Some of the tabs and pages have disappeared. Canon's trying to make it simple, right? Just keep that in mind. So it depends on the mode and whether we're in video or stills. I'm going to flip this back to M, flip it back to video, going to press the menu button. And the way this works is that when you get your camera, the video audio levels are going to be automated. Come into your second page out of 10, red tab, video setting, come down to audio settings. Currently, this is turned on to the built-in microphone And you'll notice that the external microphone is turned off, which is a real pain. We also have our audio status. We come in here, you can see the channels and the levels, right? So what it wants us to do is to put it in a non-automatic mode. Manual. When you get your camera, it'll be here. Tap the shutter button, and we lose that bracket, the ability to change it to manual. So when we're in the auto mode, we lose the ability to change our audio levels. And this is critically important because if it's on the auto audio levels, there are going to be fluctuations in gains depending on how loud things are. And if we're recording video, we never want that. We want this to be manual. Come in here, second page, audio settings. The first thing we're going to do is turn this to manual. Tap the shutter button. And we should be able to change our levels from here, from the Q button. It's a lot of work to get this set up, but once you change it, you'll never go back. So I can turn down the audio gain, and you can see that even as I snap my fingers, I can't barely get to the red. And if I turn it up, it's easier to get to those red marks. So we want the audio to be landing between the yellow and the orange when we're recording video. That's going to give you a nice, clean signal that will be easy to clean up, make it sound amazing, and put it on your video. Many of you are going to have the question, what if I don't want the built-in microphone? How do I get an external microphone? Okay, so the way this works is Canon wants you to plug something into the microphone jack. And once you do, this will turn on. I'll just show you real quick. I'm going to open this flap on the side, plug a jack in. There it goes, external microphone. Now we are telling the camera to record from this microphone instead of the built-in microphones. Just a nuance you have to be aware about. If you can't seem to access it, that is probably why. Take it out. There are some other menu items in here we haven't really talked about. You'll notice this guy right here. This is our overheating warning indicator. It will turn red when the camera is getting too hot and it's about to shut down. We have select a card. Which card are we recording to? We have our setup for our formats for video files, whether we're shooting in HD, 4K. We can come in here and select all these. This guy here deals with how wide, this one deals with how tall, and this is the frame rate. But this is where we determine the format size, compression type of our video files. Hit OK. So I'm set up for 4K, 30 frames per second. We have some other options here on the side. We have our image stabilization. This is a digital image stabilization. I typically do not use this, but if you had something really shaky and you wanted to correct it in camera, you could play with that. White balance, picture styles, digital zoom. I also do not use this. This allows the camera to zoom in a little bit, but it just basically crops it. You're not getting an optical zoom. And then we have our subject detection. If we continue to cycle with our information button, we have our black info screen, but it's for video. We're going to start diving into the mode dial and our exposure controls. This is probably the most important lesson that I can teach you in this video, is how do we change our shutter speed and our aperture, and how does it relate to the mode dial on top of our camera. The easiest way for me to teach you this is to start off in aperture priority mode. So I want you to rotate your mode dial until it says AV. Now, if you remember, I was talking about our primary selector, index finger, is going to change your primary setting. So what I want you to do is to put it up here and rotate it and watch what happens to this aperture setting here on the bottom. Your F number is going to change in aperture priority mode when you change your primary selector with your index finger. This is why I like to call this the primary selector. It will change the primary setting. Now, your aperture is actually a ratio between the focal length of a lens and the opening of it, how wide that opening opens up. Different lenses have different size openings, and typically the more expensive the lens they are, the wider the opening. It's not always the case, but generally speaking, wider lenses cost a lot more money because there's larger elements. It's a little bit more complex. But this is a ratio between the focal length and the opening in millimeters. That's what this F number means. Smaller F numbers means that that opening is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And so if you have something like F20 or F22, you got a teeny little opening. And if we were to go in the opposite direction, in this case F4, it's a much wider opening. So smaller f-stops, wider opening. Higher number f-stops, like F22, smaller opening. Now, as we rotate this up and down, you probably have a question. If I'm changing the size of this aperture, if I'm making it bigger and smaller as I'm rotating this aperture setting, how come the brightness isn't changing, right? How is that possible if I'm making this opening tiny, that I can still see what's coming in to the viewfinder? It's a very sharp question. And what is happening is the camera is automatically adjusting the shutter speed. So when we have a very small opening, we're using a much longer shutter speed. If I go in the opposite direction and I'm opening up the aperture, opening, the shutter speed gets faster and faster. So this is the heart of the matter when using aperture priority mode. We change the aperture and the camera changes the shutter speed to adjust for that difference in light coming in. So as we change it, the camera would add more shutter speed on a small opening, and as we get wider and wider, it would use a faster shutter speed. And I can prove it. Sometimes I get these questions, like, Michael, what camera setting should I use to shoot XYZ? I can't give a blanket statement because I don't know what lighting conditions you're shooting in. Are you shooting at night? Are you shooting in a closet? Are you shooting on the beach at 12 noon? I have no idea. So your camera settings are going to be different depending on how much light you're dealing with. And I can prove to you how good the camera is at adjusting in aperture priority mode. So find an area in your home where there's decent light. You don't have to go outside to do this, but it should be a fairly well-lit place. And I want you to take your hand and watch what happens in aperture priority mode as you take your hand and you move it in front of the lens, and you're going to start blocking this light, even covering it up completely. Got my hand over it. So keep your eye on the shutter speed down here. What's happening is the camera is constantly measuring light. And as we block that light, it increases the shutter speed to let more light in. So this is what's happening in most of the modes that we use, the automatic modes that we're using, the priority modes. The camera is measuring light and adjusting based on the amount of light coming in. And this also includes when we make aperture adjustments. The camera's making these changes. This is the heart of the matter with aperture priority. I always remember the example when everything clicked to me. It was on a wedding shoot, and we were shooting inside a dark chapel. The bride and groom were coming out, and then they were in the lobby, and then we were outside, and it was really bright sunlight. So there was 3 different shooting conditions in terms of lighting that changed within 20 seconds. And I didn't have to worry about changing my camera settings because the camera just started using faster and faster shutter speeds as it got brighter and brighter. When I was shooting weddings, I shot almost exclusively on aperture priority. I do a lot more video now, so I do more manual shooting, but typically it was either aperture priority or manual, with probably more in aperture priority. I know many very high-end shooters who shoot primarily in program mode. It just really depends on your shooting style and how much lifting you want to do between changing lighting conditions. Aperture priority is going to give you tremendous mileage. Now, there is an important caveat I must tell you about. You want to keep an eye on your shutter speed, because if your shutter speed starts to slow down too much, the pictures are going to be blurry. So there is a barrier that I tell all beginners, and it's 1/60th of a second. If you are handheld shooting a portrait, this to me is the bare minimum shutter speed to be at 1/60th of a second or faster. It can be 1/80th, 1/100th, maybe 1/200th. If it's longer than 1/60th, you're running the risk of getting motion blur or movement blur. Even if you feel like you're holding the camera perfectly still, try it out. Try shooting at 1/20th or 1/10th of a second and look to see what happens with the images. So when I'm shooting handheld, I'm always sneaking a peek. So if I am shooting on aperture priority, I make it a habit to always just keep an eye on my shutter speed to make sure I am shooting fast enough. Okay, it's a very important caveat to keep in mind. And there are actually other ways to lock this down, so to ensure that you will by using auto ISO and some other features. Let's not worry about that right now. So the next question you probably have is, Michael, well, if the camera is changing the shutter speed, how do I make it brighter? That is a great question. In an aperture priority mode, we are going to use a tool called exposure compensation. That's this bracket right here. And in this mode, it becomes the secondary selector. That's why I like to call this the primary, and this is the secondary. So the short answer is we're going to rotate this wheel to the right, and you can see that the image is getting brighter. Here it is at a neutral. It's like a diamond home plate setting. And then at +1, it's brighter. At +2, it's even brighter. And +3, it's really bright. If we go in the opposite direction, it gets darker. So the next question you probably have is, what do these numbers mean? 1, 2, and 3. These deal with what we call stops of light. And you'll notice that there's even 2 little tick marks between each of them. Each tick is worth 1/3 of a stop, and every stop is worth twice the amount of light as the previous setting. So when we go from diamond home plate to +1, we are doubling the amount of light coming into the camera. If we go to 2, now we're multiplying it by 2, a factor of 2, and then a factor of 3 times the amount of light. Now there's even a way I can prove this to you, that it is double the amount of light. I can prove this mathematically looking at the shutter speed that's coming in. So if I was to take twice the shutter speed of 1/60th, if I go 1/60th plus 1/60th, I get 2/60ths of a second, which when we simplify, it's 1/30th. So 1/30th is twice as long as 1/60th. So if I go to +1, now we are at 1/30th. If I go to another stop, what do you think it would be? If you said 1/15th, you're absolutely right. And if we add one more stop, we're about 1/8 of a second. So what is happening in aperture priority mode, we adjust the aperture with our primary finger. We can adjust the secondary setting, which is the shutter speed, using the exposure compensation feature. So if we wanted to keep it a little brighter, we may just keep it here. Come up a little higher. Want a little darker, we come down here. That is how aperture priority works. And if you understand it with aperture priority, these other modes are going to make sense. So we are going to change this to the TV, which is time value priority. Watch what happens with the selections down here on the bottom. Interesting. Now our primary selector is changing the shutter speed. Shutter priority is different than aperture priority because it prioritizes the shutter speed. We dial in the shutter speed and the camera will dial in the aperture. We can't see it right now, but if I tap the shutter button, now we can see it. We can see the camera is making adjustments to the aperture based on the shutter speed we're telling it to use. Now, there's an interesting problem here in that there are limits to the lens physical's opening. So it can either open up to a certain amount or it can close to a certain amount. And then after that point, if we keep using a faster and faster or longer shutter speed, we start to get this blinking. When we see the blinking, the camera is telling us we have exceeded its capacity to change the lens. Time value priority, or shutter speed priority, is very popular among sports photographers. I have a lot of friends that swear by it. If you are shooting sports, for me, the bare minimum is 1/500th of a second. Now there's a problem here. The camera's saying, hey, I can't open the lens wider. It's going to be flashing. You know, if we take a picture where this is going to be underexposed, it's going to be all dark. We've kind of maxed out what we can do in terms of the aperture. So the question that I have to you is, how would we resolve this in this situation? You're shooting an indoor track. You got to be at 1/500th of a second or those pictures are going to be blurry because they're moving so fast. The aperture is flashing. What would you do? Now, if you said, make your sensor more sensitive and bump up your ISO, you are absolutely correct. This is how I would resolve it. See if 1600 does. 1600, it's right there on the edge. Let's bump it up a little bit more. There. So by increasing the sensitivity of the sensor with an ISO boost, the flashing stops and the camera is able to perform at 1/500th of a second. So the question then becomes is, what's the drawback of just adding more and more ISO? So quick lesson on ISO is this is not adjusting the light. It's really giving an artificial boost to the sensor. It's not light. And the problem with this is that as you get into these higher ISOs, it becomes more and more noisy. Now, just because I'm old school, you know, I was always shooting on ISO 400, but camera sensors and their performance have dramatically improved over the last 15 to 20 years. Huge improvements, really impressive. I can shoot at 16 or 3200 all day long. If there's enough light, you're not even going to notice it. So a lot of it depends on what you're doing, where you're shooting, what your minimum requirements are, how many artifacts you want. In some situations, you'll shoot even more than that. Just really depends on what you're doing. But yeah, generally speaking, 3200 and less. Most of the time, if I'm shooting in good lit situations, I'm at 400. Just something to keep in mind that you will run into these limits when you have much faster shutter speeds. For birds in flight, you might be at 1/1000th of a second or even faster. Just depends on how fast your subject matter is moving. And in those cases, you're going to need a lot more light. So the difference between aperture priority and shutter priority is the primary input. Here, we are changing the shutter speed. The camera is changing the aperture on our behalf. Let's take a quick look at P, or the program mode. You'll notice that we lose both options. We can tap the shutter button. It gives us the ability to still select our shutter speed, but it's making changes to the aperture. Now, this is a little bit different because dialing in the shutter speed does not lock it in. It's kind of like a starting point. So program mode originally was kind of like an advanced auto mode where the camera had the freedom to change the shutter speed and the aperture. I know a lot of photographers who still use this professionally, very high-end wedding photographers. One guy in particular uses program mode. You still have the ability to change your ISO, but we're turning over a lot of this over to the camera. I talked a little bit about the dummy mode. Camera's going to do almost everything. We have a few options. We can change our drive mode. We have these different filters, kind of gimmicky filters, I think. I don't really play with them. See these different color tones, things of that nature. Not a fan of the dummy mode, and I tell my students, if you're going to start on any mode, try to learn aperture priority mode first. In the most recent years, there's been a new setting on the mode dial called FV, or the flexible value. When we start off on this, you'll notice that every setting here is in an automatic mode similar to a P mode. The interesting thing about this is we can dial in what we want depending on the settings we want to maintain. So let's say I wanted to maintain a very specific shutter speed. So I'll come in here, I'm just going to scroll using the touchscreen. Let's say we want 1/500th of a second. We want the camera to make sure we get that 1/500th of a second. And if we shoot this way, we're turning permission to the camera to not only change the aperture, but to also change the ISO. And there's ways we can limit this in the deep menu, but suffice to say, the camera has more flexibility. Let's say we're shooting, let's say we want to dial in exact portraits. We're shooting at f4 and we want our 1/60th. Well, now we can leave it on auto ISO. The camera would basically keep these locked in, and it would change the ISO depending on how much light we have. So this is how this works, is it allows us to determine what setting is locked in and what the camera has permission to change. You can also do this in other modes. This just makes it a little bit easier to figure out. So let's say we were in aperture priority mode and we wanted to go to auto ISO. It's the same basic idea. Camera has control over the shutter speed and the ISO. So that's what the flexible mode will do. And some people love this mode. For me, I'm kind of old school. I just dial it in on my aperture priority if I really wanted to. That's how I roll. Something else you should note is that when you are in auto ISO and you tap the shutter button, it will show you the current selection. So let's change aperture, and you can see that being updated here. Let's real quick talk about the manual mode. In the manual mode, we determine our shutter speed and our aperture. There's no help from the camera. Camera is just gonna let us dial in whatever we want. We still have auto ISO on. Let's turn this to maybe 400. So we adjust the shutter speed, we adjust the aperture. The camera is not helping. We can adjust the ISO this way. And what happens with the exposure compensation bar is that now it becomes a light meter. This is telling you, based on the metering modes, whether this is an overexposed or an underexposed shot. Here's overexposed, here's underexposed, and by how many stops. So it becomes more of a metering bar. When I'm shooting video almost exclusively on manual, there's different settings for that I'll cover in just a minute. But manual mode gives you full control over the camera. If you look at your smartphones, most smartphones do not have true manual controls. They're fighting you and wrestling you in different ways. And this is why these cameras are still awesome. You get full manual control over the camera, the light, the ISO, all that stuff. Again, we can also come in here and go to auto if we really wanted to. And then so we'd have locked in camera settings. The camera could update with ISO. Let's talk about the bulb mode. Basically, the way bulb mode works is as long as you're holding the shutter button down, the exposure is lasting. I'm holding it down, and we get a counter there in the bottom right-hand corner showing us how many seconds. And then I let go. Clearly overexposed. We can turn our ISO down. This is really good for really long exposures. I don't recommend actually holding the button down. There are some timers we can use so we don't have to touch the monitor or the camera and put it on a tripod. There won't be any shake. There's also remote controls we can use. But that's the idea of the bulb mode, is the longer you hold the shutter button down, the longer the exposure will be. If you're enjoying what you're seeing and at some point you're ready to purchase your first camera filters, check out Maven Filters. This is a company that I created. They're different than anything out there on the market. They are magnetic, color-coded. They swap super fast. All I ask is that you please give me a shot to prove to you these are the world's best camera filters. I promise you, you're going to love them. Let's get back to the lessons. Let's talk about the S and F mode. When we flip it to this setting, you'll notice that in the stills mode, it says P. So this is really designed to be a video feature. So we want to make sure our video icon is selected, and we get S and F up here in the top left-hand corner. S and F stands for slow and fast, and it's made to be programmable. The way we set it up is we're going to press the Q button, and then down here on the bottom, it says Setup. This can be very confusing if you've never seen it before or know the terminology. So this first tab over here deals with the resolution, which is the dimensions of pixels wide by the dimensions of pixels tall. 1920 wide, 1080 tall. This is FHD, which is full high definition. And as we scroll to the left, you can see that the resolution increased. It's a little bit wider. And as we continue to go into the 4K, which starts at 3840 by 2160, and then we can get into different compressions, and then we get this wider 4K and then a finer compression. The way slow motion works is that we shoot at a much higher frame rate than what we play back. So the recording frame rate is given here, and the playback frame rate is given here, the play button. So if we're recording at 60 frames per second and we're playing back at about 30 frames per second, it's going to be twice as slow. Now, I need to point something out is that when I come into the frame rates, we don't get some of these higher rates because it can't do it in these fine compressions. So we have to choose one of these guys instead. So we're limited to 180, 4K D without the fine compression, we're limited to 120. And when we try to select the fines, we can't select it. So there are some limits in terms of the compression, but this is 4K, 4 times as slow in the playback mode. So again, this is the resolution, and this is the number of frames per second. And we can also select the playback. You'll see that the playback changes. Usually mine's at 30 frames per second. Another thing to point out is that if we shoot at 60 and we play it back at 60, it's actual speed. So that's something to keep in mind, but this is designed to be easy access, really, I believe, for slow motion, where you would have it set to 120. We're shooting at 150 megabits per second. That's the data rate. And if you wanted to do like a fast motion playback, like if you were building a house over, like if you were building, let's say a shack over the period of a day, and you wanted to have this very slow capture, which would play back 60 times faster, this is where you would do it. What I would recommend is set this up to 4K D, 120 frames per second. Playback can be 30 frames per second, and now we're at 4 times slow. So we hit OK, and what you'll notice is, again, we've got our playback here. It's telling us 120 frames per second. This is set up now. So this warning is telling us that the camera might overheat, but when we're set up for slow motion, we now get our time code in yellow. And this is telling us we have about 32 minutes of shooting at this very high frame rate. Tap the shutter button. Let's see if we can get it to tell us what it's. Come on, it should be in there. There it is. 120 frames per second. So now slow motion is set up, and if we were to record video and play it back, it would play back in slow-mo. The last thing I want to talk about real quick is the scene mode. The scene mode, and we're in video mode right now. I'll flip this back over. The scene mode really allows us to ask the camera to shoot or to help us do some of the lifting. Most of these are gimmicks. Some of them are fun to play with, like the panoramic shot where you would want to be on a pivoting tripod of some kind where you can move the camera as you're shooting. It looks something like this. And then it stitches it together in camera. Pretty cool. Let's see some of the other fun ones. The portrait and smooth skin, these are for shooting people. It will add some processing and clean it up. If you're worried about your settings for group photos, you would come in here and select this. It's going to select a smaller sized aperture to get a deeper depth of field. Might apply some skin tones to it. Landscape, again, this is going to be optimized for taking pictures of things like mountains and streams and rivers. Most of these things can be done if you know how to operate the camera directly. There are some filters that are applied here. I think it's kind of gimmicky. Now, the only one I would really truly try to use in this is probably the panning shot, which is really fun for cool effects of moving subjects. HDR backlight control, and that's probably about it. Even the handheld night scene or night portrait, I probably would just shoot on the regular modes. Check them out if you get a chance, but I think you're going to get much more mileage out of learning the P, TV, and AV and manual modes. Furthermore, as we come to our customizable modes, C1, C2, and C3, these allow us to set up our camera very specifically. It can be down to our white balance, it can be to our picture styles, it can be to our burst mode, our shooting mode, all kinds of things. And then when we get these all dialed in the way we want, we're going to come into the yellow tab. It's going to be in here, custom shooting mode, register your settings, and it will remember those settings on that dial. Real quick, let's talk about our exposure settings in video mode. So I'm going to flip this over to video mode, and you can actually record video in the stills mode just by pushing the shutter button down, and it kind of gives you this basic mode. What I prefer to do is to do it from the video mode because we get much greater control, and I'm in manual mode. Okay, so this is how it works, is your frame rates, the number of stills you are shooting per second will relate to your shutter speed. For YouTube videos, I'm typically shooting 30 frames a second, and we want to double that to get an appropriate shutter speed if we want to follow the 180-degree shutter rule. Suffice it to say, double your frame rate. So if you're shooting at 30 frames per second, you want to be at 1/60th of a second, and then you can dial in your aperture and adjust your ISO last, depending on what it is that you're doing. If you're going for a more shallow depth of field, you might be at f4. If you want a deeper depth of field, maybe you're doing, some landscape, or maybe it's a group, then we would adjust the ISO at the last setting. If we're shooting at 24 frames per second, this would be 1/50th. If we're shooting at a higher frame rate, let's say 60 frames per second, we again would double it, so it would be 120. If we were shooting at, let's say, 120 frames per second, we would double it again and we'd go up to 250. So you want your shutter speed to be double your frame rate, then you dial in your aperture, and then you finally tweak it with your ISO. We're about to talk about the camera's focusing systems. They're highly complex and for pure beginners, overwhelming. I want you to put your camera onto the P mode just for the sake of covering the focusing lesson. The way I like to break this down is the how, the when, and the where. If you think of your focusing systems in terms of how you focus, when the camera is focusing, and where the camera is focusing, this is going to be a lot easier. So the first question, how does the camera focus? Take your index finger, get your camera if you don't have it already, get into a semi-well lit situation, point your camera at something, and push the shutter button halfway down. You can see that the camera is choosing this area of high contrast, this little focusing target that I have. We get an audio beep that we can hear. We also get this green box. When we push and hold the shutter button halfway down, you can see that this focusing lock is maintained. And when we push it down all the way, it takes the picture. So I want you to train your finger to feel the difference between focusing and taking pictures. So it's a halfway spongy resistance to focus, pushing it down all the way will actually take the image. In the beginning, this is a great way to start. As you advance, especially if you become a sports shooter, you may not want to focus with a halfway shutter button depression. For now, we're going to leave it. You may want to use your thumb button. So AF on means autofocus engaged. So we're turning the focusing systems on, holding it down, taking a picture. A third way we can engage our camera's focusing systems is by touching directly onto the back monitor. If you don't like this, there is a way to turn the screen off, but for now, this is pretty fun, easy, fast way to focus. And when we get that green lock, we can take a picture. So there's 3 different ways of how we can focus. Next, let's talk about the when the camera is focusing. And this deals with the camera's focusing modes. There's a couple different ways to access them. You can press your Q button, and we're looking for this guy right here, one shot. One shot is what I have already demonstrated is that the camera focuses just one time. Once it gets a focus lock, as long as we hold that shutter button down or the autofocus button down, the focus will not change. I can even pan the camera to the left and right, and that focal plane will remain the same. This is very useful when we are recomposing. So sometimes we'll get focus, but our subject matter isn't in the frame the way we want. Let's say we focus on something that's in the middle of the screen, but we want to move them to the side of the screen before we take the picture. We would get a focusing lock. We can do it with our shutter button. We can do it with the thumb button. We get a focus lock, and then we rotate or move, recompose the camera, push it down all the way to take the picture. Now, at wider apertures, you don't want to do this because it will pull them out of focus, whatever your subject matter is. So if you're shooting at like f1.8 or 2.0 or 2.8, recomposing doesn't really work that well. If you're at f5.6 or f8, it works amazingly well, depending on what you're doing. Suffice it to say, one shot gets a one-time focus, and we see it with a green box. Coming back into our Q menu, let's take a look at this guy, Servo. Now when we engage our focusing systems, something different happens. There's no beep, and the box is now blue. So the servo focusing mode, as long as we keep it engaged, when I move the camera, you can see that it's staying. So the servo focusing mode is not a one-time focus. It is a continual over and over and over again focus as long as the focusing systems are engaged. That's the key difference between one shot and servo. A one-time focus, a continual focus. This last guy right here, AI Focus, is a hybrid of the two. I don't really use it. I don't really recommend it. I know some people love it. So this gives the camera permission to switch between one shot and servo. I don't really like it because it's hard to predict. If you're shooting cooperating subjects, like doing a portrait shoot, maybe shooting products or landscape, I'm usually on one shot. If I'm shooting sports, I'm usually on servo. So that is when the camera is going to focus. Now let's talk about the where. The where deals with the camera's focusing clusters. And when I say cluster, what I mean is it's an area of the monitor that we're telling the camera to look in. To access the clusters, there's a dedicated cluster button here. We can push and jump straight into the menu. I'm a fan of it. I like this because it's fast and it's easy. And the first one here, you can see the name of it, Whole Area Autofocus. The way this works is, turn these guys off. Essentially, it tells the camera to look in the entire frame. And what it is looking for is an area of contrast. This is why I'm using blinds with a black focusing target. It's saying, this is the greatest area of contrast. I think you should focus on here. It's pretty straightforward for beginners. However, there are going to be times you will have far more subjects in your frame and the camera may not know. It typically likes to pick something closer to the camera as well. But let's say we want to limit where the camera is looking. We can press the cluster button and we can come in to our spot autofocus. Tap the shutter button to jump out. And you'll notice that this is a tiny little square and it's not on the target. Here's another trick, is you can push the joystick into the camera body and it will jump to center. You see that little dot is telling you this is centered. Now I can get my focus lock and I can take the picture. In this instance, the focusing square is teeny tiny and we're telling the camera to only look in that area. When I'm on an area of no contrast, you see how it's struggling? No line. Get on the line, focuses. But what if that little focusing box isn't big enough? We want something else. Press the cluster button. Let's go to the next biggest size. Larger box, a little bit easier, right? I think the spot mode is great for precise focus product shooting. But as we go through these clusters, what you'll notice is these boxes get a little bit bigger each time and they add these extra squares around them. We're basically increasing the size and they all have their own special names. Look at that, how interesting. When the box is on the bottom and we press our cluster button, the clusters jump up to the top. Pretty cool. So you don't have to fumble focusing through it. So this is called the expand autofocus area around. You get even more boxes. Then you can see that we have these little guys. When we push these arrows, we get a new set here, these three here. These are great because they allow us to change the shape and the size of our focusing cluster. So it says to press the color button, and we have our primary selector and our secondary selector. So as I rotate these different selector wheels, you can see the frame of the box is changing. Maybe let's say you're a bird and flight shooter and you want to keep your birds, you only want the camera to focus on items in the center third. That's how you could do it. We're going to push our color button. So we can adjust the shape and size of these in the horizontal and vertical planes. Very useful. It's one of my favorite types of shooting clusters. I'm going to hit OK. Something else you'll notice is that we have this tracking. I'll talk about it a little bit later. It allows us to, when we push the set button, to jump on the subject area of highest contrast and it'll automatically track it. Push the set button again to jump out of it. It's sort of like a tracking focus that keeps an eye on the subject, doesn't engage the focus until we push our camera shutter button halfway down or the AF on button. So those are the focusing clusters. We've talked about the how by pushing a shutter button, AF on, touching on the screen. We've talked about the when, whether it's a one shot or servo. And we've talked about the clusters, which is the different areas or the size of the areas we can choose for the camera to focus. So you will get a ton of mileage out of the how, the when, and the where of the camera's focusing systems. This is as good a time as any to talk about button customization because we have experienced shooters that are going to want to remove focusing from our halfway shutter button depression. There is another customization I would highly recommend. So we're going to toggle to the black screen, black information screen. We're going to press our Q button. We have our customized controls. So the first thing we're going to do is to remove autofocus from the shutter button. So in this view, we get an overview of the camera with a white highlight of the button that we want to customize. So here's the shutter button. I'm going to select it. And you can see that autofocus is engaged here. If we go to just metering, it will no longer focus. I recommend this for more advanced shooters who know what they're doing, they're experienced, they've been shooting sports for a long time. That's how you remove autofocus from the shutter button. If you just want to see how it works, now when I push the shutter button halfway down, there's no focusing. Coming back in to our button customizations set. Now, something I'm going to recommend is to customize our auto exposure lock, flash exposure lock button to be our focusing modes so we don't have to jump into any menu. We can just push that button and we're good to go. So we have it selected, we have it customized. I'm going to tap the shutter button. We're going to go to info screen. Something else I have to note is that if you have this on AI focus, it will not allow you to do it. So if it's set here, you will not be able to use this button for this. We're going to select one shot coming out. Now when I push the star button, it allows me to jump between one shot and servo. I don't need to open a menu. It's much faster. So I can press that, jump into something. I can then select different clusters if I want. There's actually another customization I'm going to show you that I really like. Come back into, we're going to customize. There's a button on the front of the camera called your depth of field preview button. This guy. So by default, it's set up to stop down your lens blades to give you a depth of field preview. But I like this one, direct area autofocus selection. Hit set, tap the shutter button. Let me show you what this does. This is awesome. So now when I push this button down, it allows me to toggle quickly through the different focusing clusters. And there is a way in the menu to limit the number of available options. So if you really only use 2 or 3 of them, with these 3 buttons, you can control the focusing when it's focusing. You can change the where if you want to jump into the clusters, or you can toggle through the clusters with the depth of field preview button. Those are the first 3 customizations that I recommend, and that's what I use. So I have a picture of myself here. And when you take pictures of people, it's very important that one of the eyes is in focus. It's harder to do without this feature if you're shooting at a very wide aperture. Let's say 1.8, 1.2. We have a very shallow depth of field. This tells the camera to find an eye and to lock onto it. And we don't need to dial it in precisely. The camera does all of the heavy lifting for us. It has revolutionized portrait and wedding photography. In the past, like when I was shooting weddings, we had to get a focus lock on the eye. We had to do it, using the focusing squares in the viewfinder. It was a lot harder to do. So we have eye detection, and there are a number of tools in the menu when we come into this purple tab that deal with controlling our types of people detection. So we have our eye detection. If we come in here, we can turn it off if we don't like it. We can even tell it to prioritize the right or the left eye. When it's on auto, it is going to make that decision for us. I'll leave it there for now. Currently, I have it set to people. So there are algorithms within the camera designed to find human faces. Canon's algorithm on animals works on pets like cats, dogs, birds. It uses a different set of algorithms to find those creatures and get a focus lock on the eye, because again, it's like taking a portrait of a person. There is also vehicles. We can turn this algorithm off completely, and we can also set it to decide for us. I leave it on people for now. Now, there is another feature in here that allows us to register people who are priorities in our life, like our kids. So if you're thinking kids playing sports or kids at a birthday, every photographer should own a polarizer. Maven delivers clean color, accurate contrast, and zero hassle. They're magnetic, color-coded, and award-winning. They also come with a lifetime warranty. You can get yours at mavenfilters.com. We can turn this on, and then we can photograph and register that face specifically. So I have this picture of myself. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Let's change this just a little bit, and I'm going to zoom out. Something like this. And we're going to take a picture. Do you want to register this? We're going to say OK. And I'm done, right? We can also select people from images that we have on our cards. We can change or delete the prioritization. So if you have more or special loved ones, you can change their prioritization. We can delete. We can also save and load registered faces onto a card and transfer them to another camera. So really awesome. You know, if you're shooting a lot of like team sports, or your children especially, and you want the camera to find and prioritize them, this is how we do it. So now you can see, if I zoom in, say on myself here, you can see that it's recognizing me, and it does so. You can see this little icon here down on the bottom. It's like a little portrait with a circle. What the camera is saying is, hey, we recognize one of your registered faces. And you'll notice that we get these arrow keys to the left and right, so I can change which eyeball I want. We get the doubled four corners, which is our tracking. The camera is automatically going to start tracking the subject. Now, here's the interesting part. I'm going to zoom out, and there's a picture of my dad and I from a long time ago. It's kind of underexposed. Maybe let me bump this up just a little bit, make it easier to see. We get these arrows, and I push to the left, and it jumps onto my face, but when I push to the right, it won't allow me to focus on my dad. The precision in this is pretty amazing. Look how small our faces are. I remember when face detection first came out, it was not this precise. You had to have like a certain amount of real estate in order for it to see it. There it goes. So if it's just the two of us, I can manage it. It's kind of fighting me a little bit. But I share this to show how tight and how small, even, yeah, that's crazy. Even the different eyes. So when you do it right, what will happen is the camera will be able to find your registered faces, even in a crowd of people, even with many years of difference between them. So it's becoming more and more accurate. It's a really powerful tool if you have kids or loved ones, and that is the face recognition. Obviously, if this becomes annoying and you're tripping over it and you don't want to deal with it, you can come into register priority and just turn it off, and we notice that icon disappears. Having gone through tons of different focusing techniques, we'll talk a little bit more about video in just a moment. I want to talk about manual focusing. So there will be times you will not want the camera helping you. You want to lock your focus down. And the way to jump into that is with the lens switch. Usually it's the fastest, is just move the lens switch from autofocus to manual. You'll notice that the moment we do this, we get this little bar. So in manual focus, when we see this graph and this bar here on the bottom, we can rotate the camera's manual focus ring, and we can change it to the distance to focus in meters. This is focusing at affinity. It's very useful for landscape shooting, astrophotography. It essentially means anything past that point should be in focus. But there are even better manual focusing tools in our camera, and I call this manual zoom focusing. See this little magnifying glass? We're going to push that. That is going to magnify times 5, and then I can rotate my focusing wheel. I'll tilt this up just a little bit so I can see the eye. I use manual focusing a lot on video, probably more than anything on video is manual. So I can dial this in precise, but if I'm not sure, I want to be closer, push it again. Now I am at 10x. I just tweak this focusing ring until I get it in focus there. And then I can jump out. That is manual zoom focusing. It doesn't need to be on people. You can do it for products. You can do it for video. It locks your focus point down to a specific location and it will not change until you change the ring or you go back to a focusing mode. Extremely useful for video shooting. While we're on the topic of manual focusing, there are some additional tools built into the system that I want to point out real quick. Come into your purple tab in the deep menu. It's going to be page 6 out of 7. And we're going to turn on something called manual peaking settings. We're going to select high. We're going to select, in this case, let's just do blue. And we're going to turn this on. When this is turned on, if I turn it back to autofocus, you can see it disappears. But you will notice there is a faint blue highlight appearing in certain places of high contrast. Look at my hair, look at my eyes. See if we can hide some of this info. See if we can turn our settings down a little bit. There we go. Now we're starting to see it better. You can see this very faint blue line on the blind edges in my hair, on my chin here a little bit. So what peaking focus does is it puts a color overlay on areas of high contrast in the frame. Videographers use this a lot. You can change the color if the blue isn't working for you. We want to do red. This is how the tool works. It's a very useful because you can see exactly more or less where the depth of field is as you're shooting. There are additional focusing tools. Turn this one off. This other one is called the focus guide. We saw it earlier on Canon video cameras. I'm going to just pan over here, get away from that. We're looking at these 3 tick marks. There's one in the center and on the sides. Oh, it wants an area of contrast too. So let's just get this. So now as we rotate the manual focusing ring and to the point that they all align, they'll turn green. Boom. So what it's telling us is here's a way that you can manually focus using those tick marks for whatever reason. When they're aligned, it's saying, yes, this is the area of highest contrast. When we pan over to an area of low contrast, you can see it doesn't really work. Come back into the menu. This last one here is to clear, magnify, zoom. I'm going to turn this one to on, focusing guide. What this does is that as we punch in, if we want to jump out of that, tap the shutter button and you're out of it. Very useful if you use it a lot. Lots of great focusing tools, both in auto as well as manual. Let's take a look at some of the video focusing tools. We have a focusing target here and we have my face target. So obviously I can use the back monitor to touch focus and you can notice how fast it's jumping. It's kind of a jumpy, fast focus. When I flip over to the video mode, and I do the same thing, you'll notice it's a smooth, gradual transition. And the reason why we're doing this is because in Hollywood, there's somebody called the First AC. His job is to focus, and he does it manually with control wheels to keep it smooth and steady. When the Canon 70D came out, this was the first time I saw the feature. My mind was just blown because you can replace somebody's job just by touching on the back monitor. You know, we're often shooting alone. So this is racking focus using the touch monitor. It's usually much smoother. You'll also notice we have this Servo AF that when we turn it off, the camera will not focus. When I shoot video, I'm typically in a manual focus, but if I am using this tool to shift attention from one subject matter to another during a video shoot, this is exactly how I would do it. I would use this touch to rack focus tool. Another funny nuance I need to address is that if I flip back to stills mode, you remember manual peaking? So I'm going to flip the video or the switch. Now I'm going to flip from autofocus to manual. You can see that we still have our peaking. Now I'm going to flip over to video mode. We lose our peaking feature even though we're in manual focus. So this nuance is that the menu systems between stills and video, even though they're the same feature, if you turn something on in a stills deep menu, it doesn't necessarily mean it is turned on for the video deep menu. You can see it's turned off here. I can flip the switch over to stills, go into the deep menu, and it's on there. So keep that in mind. The camera sees the video deep menu and the stills deep menu as two different things. Even though it's the same exact feature, we can turn it on here if we want. Make sure you press the set button to select it, make sure it's on, tap the shutter button, and then we get our peaking in video. Something to keep in mind. Let's talk about picture styles real quick. In the beginning, I don't really recommend you mess with these too much. There's an auto picture style and there's a standard. You're gonna be fine if you just leave it on auto for now, but as you get into certain kinds of shooting, you are going to probably tweak these if you use JPEGs a lot. And when I shot weddings, I shot the reception, the candids, those were JPEGs. If we're doing portraits of the bride, with the groom on the altar, obviously these are going to be RAWs. We're going to tweak them and post-process them. If you have a JPEG heavy shoot, we are going to want our images recorded in such a way that we will do as little processing as possible. I would consider this more of an advanced setting. So if you're a pure beginner, I wouldn't worry about it. Let's talk about picture styles. To access them, you press the Q button. Here they are on the right here. And you'll notice that we have these different letters to designate which one it is, and some numbers, and there's even a little name. In the beginning, auto is fine. If you're a pure beginner, just leave it on auto, you are going to be fine. We also have a standard one that has slightly different settings, even though the numbers are the same. And then we have this thing called portrait. It's kind of hard to see, but you can see the color tone on my picture changing between these. So look at my forehead. From standard to portrait to landscape, you can see the color is changing. So what these are and how to access them is we press the info button. These are little recipes that tell the camera how to tweak JPEGs before they are recorded. Things like contrast. If I wanted to have more contrast, I could turn this up or I could turn it down. You can see the contrast on my face is changing. If I wanted less saturation or more saturation, I can do that as well. And it's a way for you to tweak your JPEG files. If you wanted monochrome, they have it. The color tone is also here. You can come back up. But there's tons of them. There's portraits, there's landscapes, fine detail, neutral, faithful, monochrome. You could even define 3 of them on your own. They do have additional settings in there that we don't have control of. So for example, if you're shooting a portrait, there are flesh tone algorithms in there helping you that you're not going to be able to tweak. If you're shooting a landscape, your greens and your blues are going to be more vibrant. So the idea on this is if you're shooting landscape, you would have it on the landscape picture style. If you're shooting portraits, you would have it on, obviously, the portrait picture style. If you're a pure beginner, intermediate shooter, put it on A or standard. Either one of those are fine for now. And then you can tweak them as you get more and more advanced. And those are picture styles. Let's talk about white balance real quick. White balance essentially tells the camera what kind of light we're shooting in. I'm shooting inside my studio and I actually have some mixed lighting conditions. So I have it dialed into a custom Kelvin setting that I've actually tweaked. I'm going to change that. For the most part, shoot in auto white balance if you're just getting started. Canon's cameras actually do pretty well figuring out what kind of light they're shooting in, and it makes the adjustment automatically. The truth of the matter on this is that our eyes see and adjust to light very differently than camera sensors. Camera sensors have to be told what kind of light they're shooting in. And these have different temperatures, whether they're more of a blue look or more of a more yellowish kind of look. Sometimes this is referred to as hot and cold. And the terminology can be very confusing in terms of what's happening. To access our white balance settings, we're going to push the Q button. We can also access it with the MFN button. And you'll see them here on the bottom. And the idea is, in a perfect world, you would adjust your camera's white balance depending on the light that you're shooting in. And I want you to watch what happens to the color of the blinds as we scroll through this. They begin to shift colors. So we've got auto white balance, daylight, shade, see how it's changing colors here, cloud cover, incandescent light, which is a tungsten light. You can see it's turned really blue. Fluorescent light, which is almost a purple. If we're using strobe, we can also do a custom white balance. And then we have our Kelvin white balances. You can see it starts at 5200. So the idea is that we want to set our camera to be shooting in the type of light because the camera will see it as different colors. So if you're out shooting with auto white balance and you're reviewing your images and you get this magenta tone or this maybe like a really strong blue tone, probably it's your white balance that's not set correctly. The way this works, just for the science of it, is the camera will add the opposite of the color light you're shooting in. Probably the easiest way to think of it is candle lights. Tungsten lights are also a lower Kelvin setting. So candle lights is a very yellow kind of light, and you can see that this is kind of like a blue tint, right? So what's happening is that when the camera knows we're shooting in a yellow type of light situation, it is going to add blue back in. It does the opposite of what we're shooting in to try to balance it out. If we were shooting in something that was a much higher Kelvin, it would be something, in fact, let's just dial it in and I'll show you real quick. Let's go set. So this allows us to tell the Kelvin temperature that we're shooting in is that as we get into these higher color temperatures, it becomes more and more almost like a yellowish, orange-ish kind of look. I like to think of this as, like a blowtorch is really, really hot. It's a really blue light. And the camera on these higher Kelvins will add yellow and orange back into it to balance it out. That's kind of like the short overview of how white balance works. Daylight balance is typically at 5200. So if you do a lot of studio shooting, you're going to want to have lights that are daylight balanced at 5200 Kelvin. Kelvin, without getting into too much of the science, there is this essentially a device, a theoretical device called a black box that radiates a certain color at different temperatures. And so when you hear this referral to Kelvin light, that's what they're talking about, where tungsten light might be 3200 Kelvin, daylight and flash balance might be 5200 Kelvin. That is what they're referring to. It's the color standard temperature based on this black box experiment. When you get into a mixed lighting condition, like I'm shooting in now, we may have to do a custom white balance. And I'll show you how to do this right now. We're going to come in fact, let's jump out of this. We're going to go to this guy here, custom. And it has a garbage icon, shoot to set white balance. We're going to push that, and we're going to take a picture of something white, the blinds. We're telling it this is what's white. And then once we go into our custom white balance, it's basically saying we have measured the light for the scene, even including the mixed lighting conditions, and this is as close as we can get to perfectly white balance. We can also come into the menu. Let's come in here. Let's see if we can find this thing. Okay, page 4 out of 10. We have our custom white balance setting. We select this, and it'll allow us to choose an image if we have already taken one. Sometimes I'll just throw in, a sheet of paper. Just depends on what I'm doing. Let's talk about real quick another feature in this, which is the shift and bracket, which I've changed because of something I noticed on my camera. I am shooting in my studio, but I have light leaking in from outside. Daylight and different other kinds of light are mixing. So what I did is I shifted the white balance. This is something that most beginners are not going to do. But when you come into this setting, info, it is going to allow us to shift the color one way or the other. And I noticed it was leaning a little heavy onto the blue side, and I didn't like that. So I came over here and I shifted it to red. There's some funky things going on with the monitor, and I'm noticing there's a little bit of blue on this side no matter where I aim the camera. It's kind of been bugging me, but The auto white balance shift and bracket allows you to tweak even after you have the right white balance. So we have blue, green, amber, and magenta, and we can shift that. This is not something that a beginning or intermediate photographer would be messing with, but if you noticed something and you weren't happy with it and you wanted to get a little bit more neutral, you might come in here and play with that. Again, for the most part, if you're a beginning photographer, auto white balance is going to be your answer. And when you start to notice these color shifts, you're going to want to come in and get more specific. This also applies to video. And it's more important that you lock it down in video, because if you have color light shifting, the camera will try to correct it. And then you'll get these color shifts on your video and it doesn't look really good. Real quick, let's talk about our camera's drive modes, which is what the camera does after we push the shutter button down all the way. So you'll notice that we have this H in green. This is designating our current drive mode. We can access it by pressing the Q button, and we get the drive modes on the bottom. As quick review here, single shooting means we get a single frame. We push the shutter button down all the way. It takes one picture, even if we hold it down. So these drive modes, these three here on the bottom, high speed continuous with a little plus, high speed continuous, and low speed, it really depends on how we have the camera set up. If you're using a mechanical shutter, this is 12 frames per second. I believe this is like 6.2, and this last one is 3. Obviously, when we're moving a physical shutter, it requires a lot of energy for the camera to do this. If we are using an electronic shutter, the mechanical shutter stays open and it's capturing the image electronically, and this would be 40, 20, and 5. I will show you electronic shutter at the end of this lesson, just so you know where to find it. As we come across these other ones, now we have a 10-second timer, a 2-second timer, and a 10-second timer that allows us to tell it how many images we want to take, whether it's 2 or 10. If you're shooting group photos and you have to be in it, this is very handy because people close their eyes and they're blinking, and you can just set it up for like 10, family pictures over Thanksgiving or Christmas, and you'd be good to go. So this is what the drive modes do. It tells the camera what to do after we push the shutter button down. And also, as a side note, on these continuous burst ones, you have to hold the shutter button down. So by default, we're going to come into the menu. It's the red tab, page 6 out of 10, and you're going to scroll down here to shutter mode. If by default, it should be set to something like this, electronic first shutter curtain. Listen to the mechanics of the shutter closing. So we can actually hear it. If you want to hear a full mechanical, basically the same. Listen to what we get when we get electronic shutter. So there's no physical shutter opening and closing. So it just really blitzes through them. 40 frames per second. I mean, we're talking about, that is awesome for a camera in this price range. I think it is. There are some limitations with it in terms of if you're shooting in certain lighting situations where we got flickering lights, it could be a problem, but suffice it to say, this is really awesome feature to have in our camera. Let's talk about the camera's metering modes. This applies mostly to still shooting, although the evaluative metering does work in a movie mode. There are 4 metering modes, and the easiest way for me to explain this is to talk about the spot metering mode first. So I'm going to change it to spot metering mode. It's this little dot in the middle. I usually don't leave it on spot, but it has a time and place, and I'm going to move the camera over here to the right. You'll notice that we have this little circle in the middle of the screen now, and what this is telling us is the camera is now measuring light only in that little circle. So I have a headlamp turned on, and as I move that circle over the headlamp, what you'll notice is the camera will get very, very dark. The camera is turning the exposure, the automatic exposure of the camera down because I'm in aperture priority mode. I'm at f7.1, but it's recognizing that this is a really bright amount of light coming in. So what it does is it turns down the shutter speed dramatically. And at the moment I move it away from that bright light, the shutter speed changes because it says, hey, there's not as much light here. And it slows the shutter speed down to let a ton of more light in. So this is what's happening with the metering modes, is that we're telling the camera to sample light in different parts of the image. Now, the next metering mode I want to talk about, if we come back here, is the partial metering mode. And what this does is it just expands that circle to be a little bit bigger. That's the only difference really between the two. And then there's the center weighted metering mode. If I come over here, this is kind of like a hybrid. It's a little bit bigger area, but as I'm scrolling, see, it doesn't really get as dark as quick. So it's kind of a more of kind of like a hybrid between spot and what the normal mode is, which is the evaluated metering mode. By default, and in most settings, you're going to be using this. And what's happening here is the camera is looking at the entire exposure and it's disregarding this very bright light as, you know, something it should be setting the camera settings on. It's kind of evaluating everything. So for beginners, intermediate photographers, I would say start here. The new Maven Mini ring light magnetically connects to your lens and partners with all of our magnetic filters, including the new diopters. You get complete control over your color temperature and brightness. It is an insanely useful tool for any content creator, including Zoom calls, FaceTime, and tabletop content creation. You can get yours at mavenfilters.com. Let's talk about the deep menu section. What I want to do is to focus on the most important items as a beginning and intermediate photographer that you need to know. Some of the items in the deep menu are not useful. I will try to point those out. Some of them require their own lessons, like the focusing bracketing lesson I hope to make a separate video for. As we get into the deep menu system, there's something critical I have to note is that the mode that you are shooting in determines what you will see in here. I get a lot of questions. Hey, I don't see what you see. If you are on the dummy mode, for example, in a stills, you notice some of these tabs and some of the pages have disappeared. I only get 5 pages here. Whereas if I'm on manual and I'm in the deep menu, it's really P, TV, AV, M, B, F, V. All of those modes are going to show you the same things, but dummy mode will not. Also, keep in mind that there is a different menu section for video. When I flip over to the video mode, some of these pages are also going to change. There's a couple ways to navigate through these pages. We have colored tabs at the top, and we can navigate through the colored tabs with our ISO control wheel. We also have different pages within each tab. Here's 2 out of 10. We can navigate those by rotating the primary control wheel. And we can also go up and down by rotating the secondary control wheel. So each of the control wheels changes different menu items. And of course, you're probably going to love to tap on the monitor. We get a little definition of what that page is all about. The page we're on out of total pages, you can use the corner of your finger to touch on the pages, the tabs, or even the item directly. So very easy to navigate. I really think it's the red, the purple, the yellow tabs. Those are the ones that I use the most. There's tons of things in here that deserve their own lesson, and some of these things you'll never use. Let's start off with the red tab. Image quality deals with how the images are being recorded to your memory card, how the stills are being recorded. We have the ability to record in RAW or JPEG. RAW is the complete information as it is captured by the sensor. These files are much larger. They have a much greater amount of processing ability. They have greater dynamic range. They have better color control. And we select this by pressing RAW here. I'll just turn that one on. I'm going to turn this one off. Next, we see the number of megapixels, which is simply multiplying the width dimensions by the height dimensions. So 6,960 wide by 4,640 tall. That gives us 32 million point 5. And then we have the number of shots remaining in this bracket based on the memory card in the file format that we're shooting in. You'll notice this little red box that highlights what we want. So this RAW is completely uncompressed RAW, very large file sizes, and then we have a compact RAW. You'll notice the number of shots remaining increases dramatically. C-RAW compresses in areas of high contrast. So if you are an astrophotographer, I would not recommend this. You'd see these little blotches around your stars. It's very difficult to see, but if you zoom in and you've been doing this long enough, you can see it. Sometimes there's reasons to go with fully uncompressed. If you have a very high-end professional shoot, you're being paid a lot of money, probably going to be shooting on RAW. If you are shooting more images, but you still want most of the RAW processing control, you would go for CRAW. Now let's talk about the JPEG and HEIF, high efficiency image format. I typically still shoot in JPEG, but HEIF is becoming more and more popular, a little bit more efficient. People are starting to love it. It's being recognized by more and more systems. But again, I like to stick to JPEG. So you'll notice these letters here, L, M, and S. These deal with the file sizes, the resolution. So if we select on these, you can see that we go from our full L to a smaller file, which is 15 megapixels. And then we have S, which is a smaller 8.1. And then we have a 3.8. The short answer on this might surprise some people. I usually recommend jagged L. It is almost impossible to see the difference with the naked eye between smooth L and jagged L. And what is the difference? The difference is the amount of compression. Smooth L files are a little bit more fine in the details, but again, this is something that I have tried over the years to see the difference, and it's almost impossible. So when I was shooting weddings, thousands and thousands of images, for the sake of post-processing and editing speed, I would shoot on jagged L. I'm not a huge fan of shooting in these smaller sizes simply because it's harder to up-res. You can do it now with AI. It's getting a lot easier. So if you got into a jam, you could probably work something out. But the short answer here, jagged L, JPEG. If you have an important shoot, then you're going to want to shoot RAW. Just remember, you're going to need lots of memory, big hard drives, lots of processing power. Jagged L for beginners is where I think you should start. Dual pixel RAW is something I just recommend not even messing with. When it first came out, the idea is that every pixel has two parts. It can use this to kind of shift the focus a little bit, but it was so minimal for the amount of the size of the file and the trouble. It just wasn't worth it. Cropping aspect ratio. For the most part, I recommend shooting in full crop mode. If you want to shoot in a 1:6, which is an APS-C size crop, you can do this. Just know that you are losing resolution. You can shoot square. And when we do this, we get these frames here on the sides, you can see it. So if you wanted to shoot for perfectly square images, you can. We can shoot in a 4:3 aspect ratio, and we can also shoot in cinematic aspect ratio. My dad actually loves to shoot this way for stills. Come in here and turn it back to full. Digital teleconverter is not something that I would recommend using. What this does is it allows you to crop in to the frame. It's doing an artificial zoom, and then it up-reses it to the full resolution. So you're taking the same size image at a larger resolution. So it's kind of a gimmick, and I never use it. Let me turn that off. I guess if you really wanted to magnify something, you could do it, but you could also use that using the magnifying glass. And then we're going to go to page 2, Auto Exposure Compensation AEB. This feature is useful, and it tells the camera to take different exposures at intervals that you want it to. So we get the exposure compensation bracket, we get these tick marks. I'm rotating the primary control wheel up here. And what we do when we set this up is it's telling the camera to underexpose by 3 stops, take an even exposure, and then an overexposure. So when I hit OK, got my blinds, and I play those back, you can see the different exposures. There's an even exposure, here's an underexposure, and here's an overexposure. This is useful when you are in high dynamic range conditions. And when I say that, I mean lots of very bright highlights and very dark shadows. A cathedral of a church, for example, or maybe even certain kinds of sunset situations when you're dealing with the sun and shadows and rocks. And photographers will use this feature to make sure they have exposures for the subject matter that they can take back into Photoshop and blend to make a high dynamic range image. Now, this also behaves a little differently between manual mode, which I'm in right now, this thing, AEB, Auto Exposure Bracketing. I can flip this over to AV mode, come back into the menu, and now we get this bracketing shift with our secondary control wheel. So we can just kind of jump it around. We don't see it in manual because we can set our own settings in manual, but in TV and AV, P mode should all be there. So auto exposure bracketing is a way to tell the camera to change the settings between 3 shots. And then when we're done, come in here, rotate these together until we see 1 tick mark. The most useful thing about ISO speed settings, if we come into this menu, we get the basic setting that we're on right now. We can also set the range if we wanted a minimum or a maximum. Low ISO, 50. Then we have our higher ISO, 102/400, if you wanted to max this out. Then we have the ability to set the range when we are in auto ISO. So if we did not want to go over a certain amount, we could limit it here. Same with the minimum, just basically setting limits on what the camera can use for its ISO. When we're talking about the minimum shutter speed, this deals with when the camera is changing our shutter speed for us. In the demonstrations that I gave, it was on auto, but if we wanted to limit the minimum shutter speed, we could come in here and say 1/60th of a second. This way we don't have to keep sneaking that peak when we are handheld shooting in aperture priority mode. So we're just basically telling the camera you can't go slower than 1/60th of a second. We'll leave it on auto for now. And you'll also notice on auto, we have the ability to tweak things just a little bit if you want a faster or slower shutter speed. I think that's kind of confusing. We're gonna hit OK for now and just leave it on auto. Anti-flicker shooting, I'm gonna turn this off. These features basically give the camera permission to recognize when there's a flickering light source. And then if you're in a burst mode, it will slow it down a little bit. I have used this maybe once or twice it was like at a car derby kind of thing where we had all these certain kinds of sodium lights that were flashing and the color was changing between each shots. I came into my anti-flicker shooting, turned it on, and then they became consistent. For most general shooting situations, you're probably not going to see it, but if you see a color shift from image to image, this is where you're going to want to come in and turn this to enable. Detect priority AE while AF is a fancy way of saying that when you have a focusing square, do you want the camera to meter within that square? Do you want it to measure light only within the square? I actually really like this. I find it quite useful, so I leave it turned on. Page 3. Most of the items in here I don't really change. We talked about the color mode. We talked about picture styles. These are the little recipes that we can change to tweak our JPEG images. Let me come back out. Color space we're going to want to leave on sRGB unless there's a reason that you know about. Typically magazine or print shooters are in Adobe RGB. Clarity, I would leave it for here. This is an internal setting to shift the clarity one way or another. These two guys, HDR shooting PQ and the HDR mode internal. I played with this. I didn't get amazing results from it, but the idea is if you turn this on, now your JPEGs are going to be HEIF files, which can cram in what appears to be more dynamic range into the file. Some people swear by it. I have a hard time seeing it. If I'm going with great dynamic range, there's other techniques that I use, like using filters. Even the built-in HDR, I think, is a little bit better than this feature, but it's there if you want it. I would consider this more of an advanced feature. HDR mode, if you're shooting in a very high dynamic range situation, like sometimes when I go to the beach and I'm shooting into the rocks in the sunset, this is a good feature to know about. I typically select this bottom one, and it will essentially take an image. We can change the number of stops between the dynamic range. It can take all of the images, and it can also merge them together in a single HDR image. It's pretty cool if you just want to stack it in camera and see what it looks like while you're still out there shooting. There's also a newer version of this for moving subject matter. You're just telling the camera, hey, we might have some waves or some trees moving in this image. This would be a good follow-up lesson to demonstrate how it works. Auto lighting optimizer. Again, this applies mostly to our P, TV, or AV modes. This gives us a little bit of shift of contrast, and I leave it on auto most of the time. If you want to turn it off, let's see here. AV mode, is it on? Yeah, just a low amount of auto light optimizer. Highlight tone priority, I usually leave turned off. This deals with overexposed parts of the image. I am typically looking for this anyway, and adjusting my shutter speed or my aperture to expose properly. I might look at my histogram. This gives the camera permission to help us out with overexposure in those highlights. Page 4, at the very top, this is our white balance setting. We talked about white balance already. Again, when I shoot video, it's almost always customized, a custom white balance or a Kelvin white balance, and then I tweak it. Custom white balance is if you're in a mixed lighting situation and you want to tell the camera, hey, this is white. You can come in and select that image. It's a little underexposed. And then I would come in and say, I'm doing custom white balance. Come out. Just want to make sure we got that. There it is. So yeah, if you're shooting in, let's say, fluorescent light and tungsten light, you would do that is where you can take an image straight away, and then you would select that in this menu here to tell it what is white. Did it a lot with brides' dresses, you know, when we're shooting in mixed lighting conditions at wedding receptions and things of that nature. White balance, shift, and bracket. We talked about this a little bit. It allows you to shift the white balance into different colors. Turn that back. Okay. Lens aberration correction. Suffice it to say that there are flaws with our camera lenses that we don't see. We never see them. And there's ways that we can never see them unless we get this off of the camera onto a different sensor, because there is communication going on between the lens and the camera body, and Canon has put software in there to hide those flaws. Some of the flaws we can tweak, and this is what peripheral illumination correction is that deals with vignetting in the corners. It's a darkening in the corners that if you turn this off on very wide angle lenses, you will see this darkening. So for the most part, I definitely recommend leaving that turned on. Yeah, I mean, there's some stuff going on in the background we'll never see. Suffice it to say, this mostly applies to JPEGs. Distortion correction. This is actually pretty good when you get into wider angle lenses, especially when you're shooting video. It's better to have this turned on than to try to fix it in post. So I'm going to leave that turned on. So there's some other defects in here that Canon can clean up, sort of like loss of higher resolution. Just know that when you turn it on to high, it takes more processing power and it might slow things down. So as we have all these applications to JPEGs, it may slow the camera down at some point. So if you're not getting the full 12 or 40 bursts per images, this may have something to do with it. So just keep that in mind. But for most of the shooting that I do, yeah, I want the correction for the lenses done in camera. I usually leave them turned on. This one, probably leave that one turned off because I'm happy with the resolution that I've seen so far. Chromatic aberration correction deals with the color fringing in areas of high contrast. It's like a purple or a blue or a yellow kind of line when you see black line next to something very bright. Many lenses have this, especially at wider apertures, and this corrects it in camera, again for JPEGs. And then we have diffraction correction, which deals with a softening of the image as we get into these higher apertures. You may have something to do with a low pass filter as well. This is also on. So all of these lens corrections are turned on in the beginning. As you get more advanced, you may want to come and turn some of them off to understand what those things do. Long exposure noise reduction tells the camera to clean up any noise related to taking images over 1 second. So if you turn it on to auto, the camera will automatically do this for any image over 1 second. If it just enable it for every picture, anything over another certain point, the camera's going to clean it up. High ISO speed noise reduction, definitely recommend this. It has improved dramatically over the years, and this cleans up a lot of the noise that we see in higher ISOs. Dust delete data. Don't recommend messing with this. This is a software way to clean up images if you have sensor dust on your images. Sensor dust can be easily seen by taking a picture of the sky at f11 or f20. You're going to see it immediately. And the way to handle this is to clean it up with a sensor brush. That's what I recommend. I don't recommend the gel sticks because sometimes they deteriorate and leave a residue, and now you got to clean your sensor. So I always recommend, just if you have an important shoot, take a picture of the sky at f20 and you will see it immediately. It's like these little gray specks. And then if you have that, go into your sensor and using a clean sensor brush, remove those dust specks. That's page 4. Multiple exposure mode is kind of a gimmick. I used to teach this on the crash course that I would make for these videos. It's essentially multiple exposures on top of each other. It's kind of gimmicky. The way you make it work is you take a portrait of a person with a bright background, and then you take another picture of something like vegetation, and it kind of creates this blend of a person with plants. Kind of cool a few times, but it's kind of like a one-trick pony, and it doesn't always work. But this other thing here, focus bracketing, this is a home run winner. I'm going to make a separate video about this because I use it so much in my shooting for products and filters and stuff like that. Extremely useful. Focus bracketing basically shifts the focus across multiple images and lets you stack it in camera so you don't have to do it in Photoshop to give you a very deep depth of field. If you're subscribed to the channel, you'll see that video when it posts, and I'll talk about it. And hopefully I'll have other videos specifically for the R6 Mark III. That is one of them. Top of the page deals with our drive modes. We talked about this. This is what happens after we push the shutter button down all the way. Burst modes, slower burst modes, timers. Then we have a really great feature called pre-continuous shooting. Let's turn this on real quick and I can talk you through what's basically happening. So you see when I push the shutter button halfway down, we get this pre-timer little clock thing, and you'll notice the number of shots remaining in the buffer is decreasing even though I'm not taking a picture. So what this is, it's a pre-buffer. Imagine your son's playing softball. It's his first time. He's about to get a hit. Here comes the pitch. I turn my pre-buffer on as the pitcher pitches the ball because I want to capture the exact moment that ball hits the bat, right? So instead of trying to time it up or using a burst mode, this will pre-buffer those shots. And then when we push the shutter button down all the way, it will record the pre-buffered shots. So it gives you maybe a second or two right before the bat hits the ball. That's what's happening. Very useful for certain kinds of sports shooting. It really deserves its own little lesson. Come back in here, turn this to off. Interval timer. This is another lesson that I would cover in like a sunset shoot. If I wanted to tell the camera to take pictures at different intervals, we can come in here, program it. Every 10 seconds, we want an image to be taken. If we have it on unlimited, it'll just take as many as it can, or we'll have 10. So this is a built-in intervalometer. Once it's set up and we hit OK, you can see the timer, it's already starting to count. So every 10 seconds, this will take an image. So if you wanted to do a time lapse of a sunset, for example, we could program the camera to take a picture every 10 seconds, and then we'd have all the images that we could put together to make a video. And if I remember correctly, if we look at this in the video shooting mode, pre-time lapse movie, let's turn this on. And so the difference here is it would actually take those images and make it into a video. Go back out to our stills, deep menu. I'm gonna come in here and turn this to off for now. Bulb timer requires that we're on the bulb mode. What this does is in regular bulb mode, we have to push and hold the shutter button down for the exposure. This just allows us to tell a time to take. Come into the info, select this. Very important that once it's selected, you hit OK or else it won't remember it. Tapping the shutter button, coming out to bulb mode. And now the camera will automatically have a built-in timer. So if you wanted to do a long exposure and not touch the camera, you know, because you get some shake, you could even come into your drive mode. Let's just demonstrate this real quick. 2-second timer with bulb mode. Now the camera's not going to shake. Boom. It's very nice. Modern cameras have all the bells and whistles these days. Pull timer, disable this. Silent shutter function. Anytime our shutter makes a noise, a beep, anything like that, if you want to turn it off, this is where you do it. Very handy when you're shooting in certain places. Certain museums don't like you making a lot of noise. Shutter mode. By default, the camera is going to come on electronic first shutter curtain. There is a mechanical. Basically, there are two curtains on the shutter. There's one that raises and then the one that closes, and they reset. This deals with an electronic first curtain, which means the camera basically stays open. And so when the exposure happens, we just get this second shutter closing. And then we have a full electronic curtain, which means that there's no mechanical. And because these are not physically moving, we can get a much higher frames per second just because the sensor's just capturing images as the light's hitting it. That's how we can get to the 40 frames per second. By default, your camera is going to be on electronic first curtain. For the most cases, it's going to be great. Sometimes you get the question, why would we want to use mechanical? It's because when you're dealing with physical shutters that close the sensor from being exposed, the images don't have this jello effect that we sometimes see with fast-moving subjects as we're panning. So the image may look a little bit more natural, and you'll see it in certain kinds of sporting or panning situations, the defects with electronic shutter. I think first curtain is fine if you're just getting started. Lastly, we have this release shutter without card. It's turned on. Might be a good idea to turn it off. There was a couple who emailed me years ago and said, hey, we shot with this feature. It was turned on and we can't find our images. So they believed that there was an internal memory writing when they were capturing the images and their whole vacation was gone. So if you have this, you won't be able to take a picture without putting a card in there. It's a nice little reminder of, hey, put a memory card in here because there's no internal memory. Page 7 out of 10, image stabilizer mode. I would recommend staying away from this. This is really designed for a video mode. And what it does is the camera will crop in on the image to stabilize the image. If you needed to do it in camera, you would do it here by turning this on. And the idea is that if you have a moving video where you're walking around with the camera and you want it to be a little bit more stabilized, you can turn this on, but it will do so at the cost of resolution. It'll punch in, and sometimes it's not the best. The way to do this is with a gimbal, which is a handheld device that we use to help keep things steady. That way you keep your resolution and everything is super smooth. The metering timer, all this does is ask you how long do you want to display your shutter speed in your aperture when you are in a situation where it's disappearing after a while. I usually have mine for 10 seconds. Image review. How long do you want the image to review? You can have it in the viewfinder, enable. You can turn it off completely. And this is the automatic review. So you'll see that I take the picture here now, nothing happens. When we turn it on, 2 seconds, I'll take a picture. Camera will show us the image that we just took. So it's automatic playback. Think of it that way. High-speed display. If this is grayed out, it is because High Burst Plus will make this disappear in the menu. So if you want this option, we have to go to H without the plus, and then we can come back in and it's available. This gives you a high-speed display as you are shooting through the viewfinder. If you're doing a lot of sports, it may be worth trying. Just keep in mind, it doesn't work on the highest setting. Display simulation, definitely recommend the exposure is turned on. This gives you an exposure preview of what it is we're about to take a picture of. This will give you feedback about how bright things are and what we should change. There are some other options to only have it active when we press the depth of field button. And it can also stop down our lens blades to give us a sense of the depth of field. I think this is the easiest way to go. This next guy, OVF, Optical Viewfinder Simulation View Assist. It's kind of a funny name. Think of this as studio strobe shooting exposure turn off, basically. This is designed to mimic an optical viewfinder looking through the lens. Why would you want to do this? Well, when you're in studio shooting and you're using strobe, sometimes it's a little bit darker, right? So the camera will try to help by changing your exposure settings and all kinds of stuff. It's hard to focus in these darker environments. So this basically lets us see what we're focusing on, the subject matter, the composition, and then when we fire the strobes, then we get the actual image. And there were some problems with this in earlier Canon cameras, is that when you put a speed light on here, we couldn't easily turn it off. We couldn't turn off this exposure prediction because as you're adding strobes and flash, it's a completely different ball game than the ambient light that you're shooting in. Suffice it to say, if you're in a studio, you need the ability to focus and compose. While you're setting up these, you're going to want to come in and turn this to on. It will turn the viewfinder to behave as if there is no exposure simulation. When it's on, just to show you I'm on manual. Look, I'm changing my settings all over the place, and the viewfinder or the display is not changing its exposure. When we turn it off, come in, and then we have it. Very handy for strobe shooting. This down here deals with HDR in our log view assist. If we want to get that kind of look in our viewfinder on our back monitor, we turn it on here. Or if we wanted it to be through our HDMI out for output, so when we're shooting in those HDR or log modes, this will give us a better preview of what's going on. For now, you're going to want to turn these off. Page 8 deals with the types of information that we see in our viewfinder as we're shooting. There's some customization options. In the beginning of the video, I had you toggle the info screen by pushing it over and over and over again. Shooting info display allows us to determine which of those screens will be available for toggling. If you didn't want to see them all, we could turn them off. I don't recommend that, at least yet. At some point, you may want to turn them off. And if we go into those screens as it's highlighted and hit edit, we can also determine what kinds of information we will see on those specific screens. So it's a way to customize what we are seeing. Pretty cool, because we couldn't do this in the beginning. It wouldn't let us. The VF also stands for the viewfinder, to toggle their information settings as we're looking in here. Think of this as a way to tweak a lot of the information that you're seeing. Earlier when we were talking about focusing and manual focus, if you wanted to see it in feet, here it is. When do you want to see the focus distance in manual mode only? When focusing, always. You can disable it. I think manual mode makes sense. Lots of great ways to customize your shooting information. Quick control customization. Remember this Q guy here? When we push this, this allows us to customize which options we have. Up here we have our autofocus right here, areas or clusters. So we come in here and want to edit the layout. It would allow us to choose what we want to have lined up. I wouldn't recommend changing this until you're very familiar with your camera and you know exactly what options you want to see in your Q menu. You hit to rearrange. You can touch and drag if I wanted this guy over here. I don't want to mess it up because otherwise it may be confusing as I'm teaching. Suffice it to say, this is completely customizable in terms of the layout and where buttons are where. So once you get a hang of the camera and how it operates, you may want to come in here and tweak that a little bit. Very cool. Exit without saving. Display frame rate set. Suffice it to say, power saving, the default, is going to be kinder to your battery. If you are in a low light situation and you want to suppress this smooth setting, you would hit the info. Sometimes when you get into very low light situations, you'll see kind of a laggy view on your monitor, and this would suppress that. In most instances, we're going to keep it here. Viewfinder display. This is looking through the viewfinder. I recommend display 1. But if you want to see everything within the frame, you would go to display 2. Reverse display, I recommend leaving on. This means that when you flip the monitor around and you're shooting, recording video, it will invert the screen so it looks more like a mirror versus what the camera, shooting from the camera side, would see. It's very useful. Auto power temperature off. There's a standard and a high setting. This basically means that when we put it to high, we're going to let the camera get even a little hotter. Gives you some warnings. Leave it here for now, especially when you're recording like 7K raw, high frame rate, things of that nature. Camera's going to get hot. Page 9, video record size. We are in a still shooting mode, but it wants to know what setup do you want. If you just hit the video record button, if you forgot to hit this, what do you want to record at? Again, we are dealing with resolution, full HD, 1920 by 1080 at 30 frames per second. So it wants the resolution, it wants the frame rate. You can't choose anything other than long group of pictures. That's a great discussion on terms of what that is and how that compression works. The long story short here is that the camera is looking at the previous and the next frames to decide what hasn't changed in order to save file space. This allows us to record in smaller video files, but suffice it to say, do you want 4K, HD, and what frame rate do you want? Let's go 4K here. And then we have a bunch of other options. Oops. So what format, unless you know what bit depth is, for the most part, you're going to leave it here until you get more familiar with video shooting. These other guys here where you see 422 10-bit or 420 10-bit, like me personally, I wouldn't shoot 10-bit without the 422. This has to deal with how much color information we have in the file. Again, this is kind of a more high-end kind of thing. If you're doing color grading, you want more information in your video file, completely different animal than just learning how to use the camera. But the fact that it's in here and you have that as an option is very powerful. We shot a movie at 422 10-bit in color graded. We didn't shoot in RAW, 422 10-bit. Great learning experience. Sound recording, obviously we want to record sound anytime we're doing video, whenever we can. The fast and slow rates, we do lose audio recording. It's just because the camera can't record the audio and the video at the same time. There are some other tricks you can do to get that audio recorded. For the most part, in the beginning, you're going to want to leave your audio format to 16-bit 2-channel. Most cameras, like the Canon R6 Mark III and others, only can record into 2 channels. So what is this 4-channel 24-bit LPCM? When I saw this initially, I was very excited, and we'll come in here and look at this because, come out here, we talked about that. Let's go to audio status. I see 4 channels in here, which makes me really excited because every channel is a different track of audio. This is extremely useful when you're interviewing people who have different microphones. In a perfect world, each of these would edit separately, meaning that you could edit your channel 1 separate from channel 2, separate from channel 3, have greater control over the audio coming into your camera. That's not quite how it works on the R6 Mark III. We have to have an adapter, and to feed 4 microphones into the camera, we can definitely do that, but what's going to happen is it will combine the left and the right into channel 1 and so on and so forth. So you're only getting 2 recorded audio tracks, but if you were in a situation where you wanted multiple audio inputs, including the ambient microphones or microphones being fed in through a specific adapter, same thing with the 32-bit float, which is, think of it as a raw format of audio. It's more forgiving, captures a greater dynamic range of sound. So we get some really incredible audio support, definitely a big step in the right direction, but it's still saving to 2 channels. So if you wanted to record 4 different microphones, you would have to have an external recorder. Very long-winded to say, for the most part, if you're just getting started, just leave it here for now. But amazing to see that there's room to grow into this camera as you become more and more familiar with video recording. The audio settings we talked about a little bit. We have it set up so we have our manual audio controls on. Again, we want to stay in this yellow to orange. Red is bad. And we have it set up so we can tweak the gain to determine how loud or how soft it is. If we leave it on auto, the camera will make these corrections and fluctuations on its own, and it's a lot harder to fix. Your wind filter and your noise reduction, I think those are fine to leave turned on. Good sounding audio is very important to your video. I know a lot of people who will turn these off because they don't want the camera messing with the sound before they get to it. But in the beginning, I'd say sure, leave them on and enable. And then our audio status, we already took a look at this. This is how we can see the audio coming in, what would be potentially recorded. On this last tab, I usually leave these turned off because ISO and my shutter speed, those are all typically dialed in manually, and it's something that I would recommend to learn as quick as possible when you're shooting video. There's also an auto level. Mine is turned off. I just set the camera up a little bit more level. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the red tab in the stills mode. Reveal the deep red glow of celestial nebulae using the new H-alpha filter from Maven, which isolates wavelengths of 656 nanometers, and the magnetic ring glows in the dark. You can get yours at mavenfilters.com. Purple tab, page 1 of 7. A lot of these you're already familiar with. This is a deep menu way to access them. This is the when of focusing that we talked about in our focusing lesson. This is the where, or the focusing clusters. We have a dedicated button for that right here. Whole area tracking. By the way, if you don't have your whole area focusing cluster, some of these items may not appear in the menu. This allows us to use the tracking mode. It's those four double cornered boxes that will try to follow a subject around. This is where we can turn it on or off. Focusing mode that's grayed out. This deals with lenses that don't have an autofocus to manual focus switch, and this is where we could come in and change it. That's why when you select this, it's saying, hey, just use the switch on the lens. And then we can turn our movie servo autofocus on or off here. Page 2. We talked about subject detection. This is where we can choose whether we want the camera's algorithm to help us focus on people or animals or vehicles, or not at all. Eye detection we talked about in the focusing lesson. This is where we can determine whether it's turned on, but we can also choose the left eye or the right eye. And then we can register people if we've already done this. This is where we could turn that on or off. Talked about this in the focusing lesson as well. Page 3. This is when we start getting into tweaking how our autofocus servo is working. I think for beginning and intermediate photographers, just leave this on auto for now. But if you're curious as to what this looks like, this is where we can come in and actually start tweaking how, see, it says the color button, press the color button here. We can change the sensitivity of how responsive or how locked on our focusing systems will be, and whether it should be more accelerating or decelerating tracking. Probably a little bit more information than you want, but as you become more advanced in your shooting different kinds of sports, this is where you're going to come in and start tweaking some of these things. Come back out. For now, I would say leave it on auto. Page 4 in the purple tab. This first item is basically saying, when you are in a servo mode and you take your first image, do you want it to be more about releasing the frame, or do you want it to be more about focusing? Default, I think, is fine for now. Some sports shooters will be more about the release. Some will be more about the focus. Again, we have the same option for a single one shot. Preview autofocus is something I recommend turning off. If this is turned on, what your camera will be doing is constantly pre-focusing. It'll be constantly trying to get locked onto things. I think it's a battery drain, so I just leave it turned off. Lens drive when autofocus impossible basically means when our camera can't find an area of contrast and it's searching, what do you want it to do? Do you want it to continue the focus search, which I have turned on, or do you want it to stop? Autofocused beam firing is when we're using a speed light. Do we want this to be active? Typically, it's very useful, especially in low light situations, and I leave this turned on as well. Page 5 in the purple tab, limit autofocus areas or the clusters. This is something that I actually do configure. So just to demonstrate this real quick, let me turn a couple of these off. Just so you can see, I like whole area F. I like my customizable one. I do like the spot one too. I'm just going to turn off these other ones here. So I now only have 3 clusters, and I'm going to make sure you hit OK or won't save it. You can see that the star button means something in here has changed as a reminder. So when I press my cluster button, I'm only given 3 options. The spot, we have the flexible zone, and the whole area. The reason I do this is because when I'm shooting birds, for example, and they land, it's different between when they're flying and when they land. And I've set up my depth of field preview button to cycle through the clusters. It's kind of hard to see. Let me turn this exposure down so you can see the button. And I'm pressing my depth of field preview button in the front. I can cycle through those 3 clusters for that kind of shooting very fast. Now, if I only wanted to limit that in bird shooting, I would also come in and save it to a C1 or a C2 or a C3. But this is how we can get very efficient with our focusing clusters if we wanted to. I'm going to come back and turn a couple of these back on. I would never use spot with tracking. Maybe these guys, sure. Hit OK. Something to keep in mind. Orientation linked autofocus point. Basically what this is telling us is, do we want to have the same focusing point when we're jumping back and forth between a landscape orientation or when we're rotating the camera into a portrait orientation? Same for both, leaves that focusing square the same. But I will say that when you're shooting certain types of subjects, let's say if you really wanted to dial in, focus on an eye of a person, you're changing the focusing point as you move the camera up and down. So this will allow you to tell the camera to change the cluster in the point or just the point when you're jumping back and forth between these two. The camera will remember and detect when you're moving between those two orientations. For now, I just leave it here. We also have the ability to limit our subject detection from those algorithm options that we had discussed. And then we talked about the different kinds of eye detection. Coming into our focus peaking settings, this is the color overlay that we demonstrated when we're in manual focus to see where the camera is focusing. It's turned off for now. We can select the intensity as well as the color. The focusing guide, we gave a demonstration earlier in the video. Lens electronic manual focus deals with essentially any lens that focuses by electronic means, which is most of the RF lenses. When do you want that focusing ring to be available? There are some very handy things in here. The first one, disable, just turns it off completely. And then we can disable it after one shot. But the ones that are interesting are one shot enabled. Let me demonstrate this. So we'll tap shutter button. I'm going to change my exposure settings so we can see what's going on. I'm going to jump into one shot. And I'm going to push the shutter button halfway down and hold it down. And then I am going to rotate the manual focus ring on my lens. So what this means is that if I engage one shot, I can focus as long as I'm holding that down. If we want to take this a step further, we can go to one shot magnify enabled. Again, halfway shutter button depression. I'm rotating it and it's jumping in so I can get a preview. If you do product photography, that's definitely the way to go. Because you're shooting in a studio setting or on a table and you're constantly refocusing on these products. A lot of fun. There are also ways to make this available all the time without doing a halfway shutter button depression on one shot. If you have it on enable, the actual size, and the one shot magnify, this depends on the lens that you're using as well as the setup. But for now, disable after one shot's great. I also like this when I'm doing product photography. Demonstrated this feature in the manual zoom option is basically when we are using the magnifying glass, if we tap the shutter button, in manual mode, let's see here, tap the shutter button, it jumps us out. Back in. And that is page 6. Coming into page 7, we can register all of those focusing settings by coming in here and naming them different sets depending on if we do different types of sports shooting, for example, and we want to tweak them to taste. Beginning and intermediate photographers, don't worry about this for now, but if you get more advanced, just know that your camera has this ability. And that is the purple tab. Talking about the blue tab, which deals with a lot of playback, editing, how we see images or different marks on our images. I use some of these in the end that I'll demonstrate, but for the most part, if you're going to be editing your images or cropping your images, it's best to do it on a computer after you have backed them up. I don't recommend tweaking images in camera or deleting a lot of images in camera because sometimes it can get a little messy. Protecting images means that we can select an image and tag it with a mark that will not be erased. This is not dealing with formatting the card. If you format your card, they're gone. But you put a little icon on an image, you select it, put the little key icon on it, there it is. And that key icon will stay on there for the life of that image. So when you move it into your computer, you'll have this protected image. Those files are very tricky to delete. People do this when they run out of memory space and they're trying to delete images off their card. They're trying to free up some space, and so they may tag a couple of these and erase all the other images. I don't recommend doing that. You can select a range, you can do it by folder, you can protect all of them or unprotect all of them. And this erase images almost never use this feature. If I delete an image, it's typically right after I took it and I know it's bad. But this is like group erasing images. So let's say you're on vacation and you've maxed out your memory card and you're far away from your computer and you have some images you want to keep and some you want to erase. You would put the key icon on the ones you wanted to keep, and then you would erase everything else to try to free up that space, anything you didn't want. You can select and erase specific images. You can do it by range, folder, or card. And the way it's supposed to work is that protected images would be intact. I have been in these situations. I don't like them. And I have learned since just to make sure that I always bring far more memory than I possibly need. But this is how you erase images. We can rotate stills. If we come in here and we want to manually rotate by pushing on the set button. There we go. We can also change the movie orientation mark depending on how we want horizontal movies to be rotated vertically for smartphones. This is where you'd come in and you, again, press the set button to rotate through these. See this little arrow. We have a rating system where we can select images and rate them from 1 stars all the way up to 5. We also have a dedicated button that can do this. Occasionally, I will use this and I'll just mark. And we have that option. The other way to do it is to take a picture. Anything in blue only works during playback. I press the rate button and you can see I get these little stars. So when we import this to Lightroom or Photoshop Bridge, those star ratings should still be applied. I definitely do ratings, but I usually do them on the computer. If I know I have a banger and it's a long shoot, I'll come in here and mark it with 5 stars. Otherwise, I don't really use this feature a whole lot. Obviously, this last one is that when you rate something, it automatically protects it. Coming into page 2, image copy from one card to another. This can happen sometimes if you accidentally set up your memory cards the wrong way, or you fill up one card and you want to erase it. This allows you to select an image, a range, a folder, or all the images from your source, in this case, my SD memory card, and transfer it to the free space memory card, copying it in camera without taking the cards out of the camera. So if I just wanted to do this, I could come in here, I would select this image, hit OK, copy to card 1. We can even create another folder. Hit OK. Copy images, and there it goes. Pretty straightforward, very handy if you run into a situation like you don't have a card reader for a specific card type. But again, most of my copying and backing up and all this stuff happens on my laptop computer. Print order allows you to come in and designate which order of images you want to print first. I have, in my 20 years of shooting, I have never printed from the back of the camera, typically importing them into my computer and then dealing with it from there. Page 3. I don't recommend processing raw images in camera because it's very limited in terms of the types of editing that you can make. But if we select it, hit the Q button to get into the processing, we can use the shot settings. We can set up processing to go from RAW to JPEGs, or let's just select one to show you. And it gives us these little options here to the right. So we can tweak our RAW files a little bit in camera and then save them or export them as JPEGs or HEIFs, or we can just use the shot settings. And this basically takes the raw image and turns it into those smaller file sizes. We can also apply it to a range of images. Creative Assist, press the set button. These are these little kind of gimmicky little filters that we can apply. Coming back out, and then the quick control raw processing, if I remember correctly, this is asking if you have it available in the quick screen, the Q screen, do you want it to be either Creative Assist, those filters, or the raw processing that we just took a look at. We can resize our image by selecting it and exporting it in different sizes. You want medium, small. Again, this is something I typically do on a large computer. If I'm exporting a JPEG for the internet, I'll crop it or resize it. The cropping feature, again, not something I typically do. You would come in here and it's not super intuitive, but we have the different options on the top. If you want to level it, if you want different, let's say, aspect ratios, gives us a prompt here using the ISO control wheel that I call. You can change the size of it. You could come in, select an area. You can save it as a new file. So there's different ways to crop. I don't, again, really use this in camera. And then we have our HEIF to JPEG conversion. If you shot a HEIF file and you want to turn it into a JPEG because it's not compatible, this is where you could do that. Slideshow, used to do this at weddings, is that we would shoot the ceremony, rush to the reception hall, plug our camera in, and as the couple and their guests would arrive, we'd have a slideshow playing on a big TV. This was way back in like 2006, 2007. And they would see their images from the reception. They loved it. So don't typically do it. You have an HDMI cable out to a TV monitor. This is where you set it up. We would display the images for 3 to 5 seconds, and then we would come down to start. Set image search conditions essentially turns our playback into a search bar. So we can come in and you can kind of see the images in the background kind of queuing up. But the idea on this is that we can select different categories or different types of criteria that we want to search for. Let's say we wanted to do it by a star rating. I'm going to come in, I'm going to hit the info button to check that. I'm going to hit OK to set it. And I'm going to tap the shutter button. So now when I play back, it's only going to show me those 5-star images and nothing else. If I scroll through, if I swipe, there's nothing else available. It's giving me this yellow border that's telling me, hey, you have search conditions enabled. That's why you're not seeing the rest. So if you're on vacation and you take 10,000 images and you've 5-starred 2 of them, this would be a very fast way to find them instead of searching through everything. And we can select other criteria, including the date, when those pictures were taken, a folder, whether they were protected, the type of file. Pretty handy if you need to search for something. I need to come in and turn that off. Hit OK to save it. View from last scene. I kind of like this. It basically, when you play your images back, it will show you the last one that you looked at. If you disable this, it will show you the one that you took last, not the one that you viewed. And then we have magnification settings when we're viewing. When we zoom in, do you want it to magnify by 2, 4, 8, 10? The actual size are the same as last time. So if it's 2x, I press play. And I come in and press zoom. You can see kind of jumping in. Let's do it with a 10x. Tap shutter button, play, and I zoom. Far greater magnification. Turn this back to 2. Coming into page 5, there's actually some good stuff in here. Playback information display allows us to select what types of information we're going to see on the different info screens during playback. So when I press play and then info, you can see that I'm toggling through different sets of information. I can scroll up and down and see all kinds of stuff. So this feature allows us to determine whether or not we want to see certain screens as we're playing back. Highlight alert can be very useful if you're shooting in conditions that are blown out. Let's see if I can make it happen real quick. Basically anything white on playback, it's going to flash black and white. This is what you would see. See how it's blinking and flashing? Very useful when you're looking for things that are overexposed. I leave it turned off most of the time. Autofocus point display. If I enable this and come back, let's see if we can Kind of hard to see. This red box that will show up where you were focusing. Sometimes when you're troubleshooting images and you're out of focus, this can be really handy to find out maybe my lens switch was turned off. Let's see what happens when we do that. What will it do? It doesn't show anything when we have that turned on. So very useful when troubleshooting focusing problems. We can have a playback grid, whether it's the rule of thirds, 6x4. If you want to see what that looks like, playback, and we get this grid overlay. This final setting is movie play count. You want it to display as record time, which is what I have by default, but if you'd like for it to display time code, you can select it here as well. And that is the blue tab. Deep purple tab deals with wireless connections. There's tons of different ways to connect our camera to things like a smartphone or a tablet, to use wireless remote shooting. Very handy, each deserving of their own individual lessons. And for the sake of time, I'm going to skip over these for now. If I get enough requests wanting this kind of a video, I'm definitely open to showing you how to connect to your smartphone. So just keep this in mind that the deep purple tab is to connect to different types of devices. Talking about the yellow tab, I like to call this camera setup tab. Very important stuff in this first item, because this is how we can configure how videos and stills are recorded onto our different memory cards. Remember, we have a CFB card and we also have an SD memory card. So if we wanted to separate stills, this camera icon is stills, this video camera is video. We come in here and we hit enable. What we're doing is we're telling the camera to record those different file types to different cards. Any stills you take will end up on your SD card. Any video you take will end up on your CFB card. You can see most of these menu items turn off once we select this. Now they do it this way because the video files typically that sustain write speed, especially in 7K RAW, obviously takes a higher, greater performance card. So by default, stills are going to go to the SD memory card. So when we are shooting stills only, what is happening? Standard means it's written to the memory card that we're selected. Auto switch means that once that memory card fills up, it is going to start writing on the next memory card. Record separately means that different file formats are going to go to different cards. So if you're shooting raw images, that's going to go onto your CFB card. And if you're shooting JPEGs, that's going to go onto our SD memory card. And then record to multiple means that the same image type will go to both cards. If you're a wedding photographer and you need backups, you want both memory cards written at the same time, this is what you're going to select. So multiple options. If I'm casually shooting and it's not an important shoot, I go with auto switch card. You can do the same if you're a pure beginner and just learning. There are reasons to sometimes shoot RAWs and JPEGs separately. So if you're shooting RAWs and those are much larger file sizes, then this is probably your best option because those take longer to write. There's a little more memory involved. And then if you're shooting dual JPEGs, this is typically where I'm at for now. Auto switch card should be fine. So when we're talking about recording options for video, again, standard means it's just recording to one of the cards. Relay recording means that once one card fills up, you're going to start writing onto the next card. And then recording to multiple cards means you're recording the same video file at the same time to two different cards. And there's some options in here that we'll select in just a moment. Select that. Okay, still image. The record and play, mine's set up right now to our SD memory card. For video shooting, I'm on my CFB card. A lot of people are worried about memory card failures. It's extremely rare, but it does happen. So this is why in professional shoots, they're typically making backups onto separate cards. To make this a little bit more confusing, we are in the stills menu. And remember that the menus change depending on whether we're in stills and video, and I want to point something pretty important right now. I'm going to flip this over to video mode, press the deep menu button again. So you won't see this in the stills menu. We're going to come down to video record options, and you can see that we have some additional items in here. There's actually a fifth one, record to multiple. Probably a little bit too much information, but just a quick overview is standard means that we're just recording video to a memory card. Relay recording again, once the first card fills up, then it goes to the second card. CFB card is our main video, an SD card is our proxy. Anytime you see the word proxy, it is a smaller video file. So we would record in a larger resolution with a smaller size resolution images. This is done for video workflow. Both files are imported. Video editors edit the proxy files, and then when they export, they give instructions to their video editor to take the larger resolution images on the export. They do this for speed and dealing with those video files as they're editing them. These last two, main and record to multiple, they're sort of similar, but they're kind of confusing. Obviously, CFB is the main video record, and then the sub is supposed to be the same resolution. In the case of RAW, obviously RAW video is very large, it requires a lot of space. We can't really write that onto an SD memory card. So in those cases, those files would be a little bit different. You can record in only one card when this is set up this way. So if you didn't have your CFB card and you just had your SD card, and it would still record, and vice versa. Record to multiple locks this setting in such a way that when one of the memory cards fills up, the camera will stop recording. So that's the main difference between record to multiple and sub. Lots of information there. I typically, if you're just getting started, relay recording is probably plenty for now. When you're in the video mode, I'm going to flip this back to the stills mode, jump into the yellow menu. Because we've turned off multiple recordings, the way I have this set up now is that my stills are going to my SD memory card and my video is going to my CFB card. We can also come in and create new folders for stills automatically. I'm going to come back out. Meet the new Maven Dream Soft filter. Create dreamy, soft focus shots with sharp centers and blurred edges. Perfect for portraits, landscapes, and even astrophotography. You can get yours at mavenfilters.com. On the file numbering, I typically have this set to continuous. This simply means is that when we take out a memory card and we put a new one in, the file numbers will continue. So if you pull your card out on 50 and you put the card back in, the next file will be 51. This is the same for both stills and video. We can come in, change the recorded file name if we want to. When you turn this on the first time, it's just going to give you something kind of generic little code, or you can just have it say image or image size. I kind of like the codes because it differentiates from all the other image files that you may already have on your computer. We may even go with something a little bit more unique. If I did MM, and then we have this space bar here, hit OK. Then it can come up and select my custom MM file. So that is how you can custom change how your stills are named. Same basic idea applies to movies. So the movie files, the names of them are much longer than what we see when we do a playback, for example. But you can see we have reel number, clip number. We can change those numbers. Let me just demonstrate. I'll play back a video. Here's a video file. So we can see a lot of this up here. Clip numbers, see how we have 0001, 0. This is actually, first letter, C00. So we get a little abbreviated here, but essentially it gives you the ability to customize what number you're on or the letters you're shooting in if you wanted to change that. Format memory card. You're going to be using this one a lot. Be very careful when you use this because it will wipe your memory card clean and you will not see them on your camera or your computer. There are ways to recover them if you accidentally do this. Now, the workflow that I recommend is to always have at least 2 copies of everything important that you're shooting. If you're just having fun and you're shooting only one set of video or still photos, for example, on a memory card, back them up on your computer. And then once they're on your computer, make sure that they're in 2 places. Maybe you'll put them on the cloud in a hard drive. Maybe you'll have 2 hard drives. In a perfect world, they would be in separate places. You would be surprised how often HD drives go bad over time. There is such thing as digital rot. So it does make sense to have some kind of a cloud service depending on how serious you are. If not, always back them up into 2 separate places. I even do this with hard drives. After around 6-7 years, I start taking all those hard drives and backing them up to new hard drives. So hard drives can fail over time. Always make sure that when you format your memory card that you have backups in 2 other places. I stress this a lot because sometimes people don't listen to me. They format their memory cards and they erase everything they have on them, their vacation or their trip or whatever. So just keep that in mind. At the time that you wipe this clean, you're going to have 3 copies, 1 on the card, and then 2 on the computer or hard drive cloud, hard drive. Always follow that rule and you'll be in good shape. Once you know you have the 2 backups, then you can come in, select this. It's going to tell you, are you sure? You're going to select yes. I had somebody watch a video and they accused me of not warning them about the wipe. So yeah, this is serious. Your cards will be wiped clean. There are some recovery softwares you can also use to try to go in and save them, but they're not optimal and sometimes you'll still lose them, so don't count on it. This is why we have to be very careful. Make sure 2 backups before you wipe your memory card. Auto rotate, leave this to on. This just means that when we tilt the camera into a portrait orientation, portrait is up and down. This is horizontal or landscape orientation. So when we take the camera and we rotate it and we're shooting sideways, do you want the images to be auto rotated when we play back? Yes, we do. Basically, this puts a little tag of information into the video file if it's recorded up and down. So when you play it back on a smartphone, it's automatically recorded. Seems to make sense. Okay, so that's the first out of 8 pages. Page 2, many of these are pretty straightforward. This is setting up your date and time. Pretty straightforward. Cancel. Depending on what your primary language is, you can select that and have it in your language and you can see it. System frequency, this deals with the playback of the video. In the United States, it's 60 frames per second. In Europe and other places, if you know what PAL is, and if that is your country's video standard, you would select PAL. The help text, we can make it larger when there is a problem. Sometimes you'll see these little question marks where we can press the info button for larger language. And the feature guide gives us a little prompt when we're walking through different menu items like the quick screen. We turned this off when we were talking about that. Page 3, camera beep settings. We wanted to turn that off. We'd come in here, disable it, and we lose that little beep when we're focusing. We can change the volume of how artificial noises, sometimes like if we're shooting in electronic mode, for example, the camera is producing an artificial noise to let you know it's taking pictures. So we can change a lot of the volumes of the different noises that we use on the camera. This is where you do it. Where do you want to listen to audio? Do you want it from the headphone jack or do you want it to go through the HDMI? HDMI is a video cable that connects to a monitor. And if we're using this for high-end, let's say video shooting, we may want the audio going through that monitor cable instead. When we select our headphones, we can change our headphone volume. We can do it in real time, which is what I recommend. And then we have the different channels. Again, we talked about this earlier. Typically, cameras are recording 2 channels to a video file. We have the ability to record 4 microphones onto those 2 channels through an XLR adapter that we'd have to buy and use separately. But when you're shooting, do you want it to go from channel 1 to channel 1, channel 1 to channel 2? This is how we divide up which channel is being recorded to which channel on the file. So right now it's channel 1 and channel 2, which is left and right. Do you just want your channel 1 written on both? Do you want your channel 2 written on both? Or do you want to have copies of each channel on each separate channel? And we get additional channel options when we use that accessory. For now, we're just going to leave it on channel 1 and channel 2. And then the same rules apply for playback, probably a bit more advanced feature if you are a video shooter. Come back out. And that's page 3 of the yellow tab. A lot of these are pretty straightforward. So you can change your screen brightness. If it's too dark, if you're shooting outside, you want to bump it up. This is where this would happen. Viewfinder brightness. So in here, do you want it to auto adjust? If you don't, you can come in and you can adjust it manually, depending on how bright you want it. Screen and viewfinder tone. So we can shift the color tone a little bit. I don't really recommend doing this. For now, I have it on 3. Then we can fine tune the viewfinder color. Page 5. Screen and viewfinder display, we talked about this earlier. So this is the screen, this is the viewfinder, and this deals with the management of this little eye sensor here. So if we're shooting on a gimbal, for example, a little handheld motorized device that helps stabilize things, sometimes the gimbal will trigger this. We can just turn it on to screen, and you can see that it's not triggering it anymore. Or we can just tell the camera to use the viewfinder only. And then these two deal with how this little guy is working. Basically what it's saying is that when the monitor is flipped out and facing you, do you want to lock it so it's only the screen, or do you want it to continue auto switching? If you leave it on auto 1 or 2, when it's closed, you will always get this. We have a UI magnification. When it's enabled, a 2-finger double tap will magnify. Punch in. Very useful if you have vision problems. You can see mine's turned on, left on. And then we have our HDMI resolution. You want it to auto resolute, if that's a term, or do you want to have it locked into 1080p or 1080i? Page 6 is that when we turn the camera off, do you want the shutter to close? I typically have this closed because I want to keep any sensor dust off of my camera as I'm changing lenses, or off of the sensor. Sensor cleaning, there's a little vibrating membrane over our sensor that we can tell it to clean at any time. If we select this, we can have it clean when we power on and off, or we can turn it off completely. And then when we clean our sensor manually, if I have time, I'll create a lesson to show you how this is done. We would come in here and select this, and it would open up the shutter, and then you can get access to the sensor and clean it. For now, we're just going to jump back out. In the beginning, when we got our camera, we set up the camera with a password. If we wanted to require the password to get into the camera, what it's asking us is to enter that password. We can change that password, or we can clear that information if we forget. Just make sure that you know what your password is if you turn this on. And then we have our different power saving features. I've turned most of these off as I'm teaching. In the real world, I'll turn these on just to save battery, to have the camera auto disable or auto turn off, just in case I don't remember to do so myself. And then when you tap the shutter button, it can wake back up. There's a screen dimmer. You can turn the screen off. These different timers, depending on how long you want to do it. Auto power off, maybe after 3 minutes, typically pretty normal. Same with the viewfinder, we can turn that off separately. Page 7, if you want to reset the camera as a factory reset, everything is off, or your individual settings, this is where you would do it. Sometimes, I remember once I lent my camera to somebody and they changed so many things, I just came in and just reset the whole camera and then reset it back up. We talked about the custom shooting dial. It's on the top of the camera. On the mode dial, you'll see this C1, C2, and C3. The way this works is we set the camera up exactly the way we want it for that shooting mode. Come in here, register the setting, and the camera will save that setting to any of those slots. We can clear those settings. We can also auto update if this is enabled, meaning if we're on C1, C2, C3, and we're changing those settings as we're shooting, the camera will update them. I usually leave that turned off. We can also save and load our custom camera settings onto a memory card and transfer them between cameras that support this feature. This is where we would do it. Save to a card, load from a card. Finally, page 8 of 8, pretty straightforward. Battery health, your battery will, with time, will become less and less efficient. Eventually, it will get to a point where you will fully recharge the battery, and within less than an hour, 40 minutes, it's already dead. When you see these losing squares and only one of them is filled, you know it's probably time to get a new battery. So we get some battery life information. Copyright information deals with EXIF data, which is the data that's written into the file of every image. So if you wanted to add your name or your copyright information, you could come in and type this in. And then for every image that you would took, it would be written into that file, kind of behind the scenes. Okay. Come back out. Show log gives us information when the password, for example, was updated. You can come in and see when changes were made to the camera. Manual software, here's a QR code if you want to open it. The manual is 1,150 pages long. So, what I'm trying to do with the video is to make a video version of this to get you through the most of it. There are some people out there who would actually like to sit down and just read that manual. I am not one of them. I'm a visual learner. We have a certification logo display. There's nothing in here to change. And then we have our firmware update. With time, Canon will come out with updates. This is software for the camera. This is where we would come in and change it. The way this works is you save it onto a memory card, you put the memory card into the camera, and then you would hit OK, and it would recognize that there's a new firmware, and it would update it. We can change the firmware of the camera or the lens, depending on what the current updates are. I personally kind of wait a week or two after firmware updates are issued because sometimes there are problems with the newer firmware. So I kind of wait to make sure that everything's good with it before doing so. And that is the yellow tab. Coming into the olive green tab, some of these things we've seen earlier in the video, like customizing our buttons for shooting. We talked about this in the focusing lesson, but this graphic here with the white little overlays is telling us which buttons we can customize. I don't really recommend doing a lot of this if you're a pure beginner, because when you come back and watch the lessons, if the button controls are different, it'll be really confusing. But as you become more and more advanced, you will likely want to customize how you shoot, the buttons, which buttons do what. It's important to learn the functions first and to feel comfortable with them before we get into the efficiencies of shooting. But we've seen it before. This is the same menu, just in the deep menu. Shutter button function for movies. So when you're in a movie mode, what does this halfway shutter button depression do? Currently, I have it so it meters only, but we can also set it up to meter and trigger video servo or one-shot autofocus. These are both different focusing modes while you're in video. I'm gonna leave it on metering only for now. Talking about the dials and the control rings, primary selector, secondary selector, ISO selector, control ring, we can customize these as well. If you're coming from a different system in particular, some of these primary and secondary settings are in different places, or maybe for whatever reason you just want to change your shutter speed with the secondary control wheel, you can come in and customize these as well. TV is time value, that's your shutter speed. AV is your aperture. This last one right here, we haven't really talked about it, but most of the Canon RF lenses have an additional ring on them. It's not your zoom ring, it's not your focus ring. It's called the control ring. It is a specialized ring. Usually it's knurled, and you can program it to do different things. I have a friend who uses it for tweaking his white balance. It is set up to be your exposure compensation while you push and hold down the halfway shutter button depression. So there's tons of different things we can come in and select it to do different things. Your ISO, there's some people who use it for that. For now, I just leave it on exposure compensation. Once you get a hang of shooting and you know what you want to customize it to, this is where you'd come in and customize it. Yeah, so that symbol right there is the control ring on our lenses. We can also customize the direction, whether they increase or decrease the setting. By default, it's decrease to the left, increase to the right. If you wanted it to go the opposite way, you would select reverse direction. Control ring direction to set shutter speed or aperture. It's the same basic idea when you rotate it one direction, or do you want to invert that? Switch your primary control wheel and your thumb control wheel when shooting. All this does is it inverts those two controls, it switches them. Second page here, touch shutter. I demonstrated this in the focusing lesson. It allows us to touch on the monitor to focus and take the picture. I tend to bump it a lot, so I leave it to disable. Up here, right next to our ISO control ring, we have a mid position called the lock position, that when that switch is pointing to the lock, it will prevent the controls from registering any changes. So you can bump them and move them and nothing's going to happen. In this menu item, we can select which items will be locked when that switch is pointed to lock. We can leave our primary control wheel on or off. Anyway, we just come in here and select these different check marks depending on how you want to shoot it. Primary selector, ISO selector, secondary control, which is your thumb button, what I call it, joystick, touchscreen, and then our control ring. I'm gonna hit cancel for now. Third page. This one, touch and drag autofocus settings, is actually pretty awesome if you know what it is. Essentially, it turns the back monitor into a touchpad for focusing as we look through the viewfinder. So first of all, we'd have to come in here and turn this on. And then this is asking, do you want to touch and drag on the entire screen, or do you want to touch and drag relative to the entire screen on a different part, depending on where you touch and move in a certain direction? Just preference here. And then this one depends on whether you're right eye dominant or left eye dominant, because when you're looking through the viewfinder, your nose is also going to be somewhere around the screen. I am left eye dominant, which means my nose is right here. Right eye dominant shooters, 66% of you are right eye dominant. Your nose is going to be over here, which means you want to be able to control where this touch sensitivity happens. In this case, come in here, you can see anything in white is where the touch monitor will be sensitive as you're looking through the viewfinder. So bottom right, if you are a right eye shooter, your nose is here. This area right here, as you're shooting, you would come in. I can't really show it because you have to be looking through the viewfinder, but you would touch here and be able to focus or change where your focusing square is, especially if you're on relative position. I would definitely recommend testing this out. Some people don't like the joystick as they're shooting, or they want a faster option to be able to just touch on the screen as they're looking through the viewfinder. Left eye dominant is a little bit trickier because your nose here. I typically activate this top right area, this little gap right in here. I don't feel like it's super feasible to do it with our left thumb because typically my left hand is under the lens. It's usually my thumb, so it's usually in this position up here. Hit OK. And then we can change how sensitive that touching is, make it more or less sensitive. It's a pretty cool feature. This guy is asking, how do we select the clusters after pressing the cluster button? The way it's set up by default is to be the multifunction button by toggling it. We can also do it by the main dial. I'll just demonstrate what this looks like real quick. Got our info here. Here's the clusters, and I'm toggling with the multifunction button. I prefer the depth of field preview selection method. Kind of hard to see there. Dial this in. So I'm hitting my depth of field preview button. We customized that already. We can change the sensitivity of the joystick. That's what that symbol means. Make it more or less. Our focusing ring. We can change the direction in which it focuses. We can change the sensitivity of when we are in manual focusing, how sensitive is the focusing ring. We can make it vary with rotational speed, or we can have it change by how much we're rotating it. Page 4, customize buttons for playback. Now, to make this a little bit more confusing, we also have our regular button customization in this menu. It's the same as we've already seen. It's the same on the other tab. So this is mainly for playback. When we're playing back images, we can jump through them by rotating the primary selector wheel. And this is asking, do you want to jump by 1, 10, a designated number that you can make up down here on the bottom by 30. We can jump by date, by folder. So it gives us a way to scroll through images faster, playback, and rotating the primary control wheel. This next option gives us a secondary way to do that by assigning a customizable button to, it's a series of items in the customizable menu. It's like jump with folder in time. You assign that to a button, press and hold it down, and then rotate the secondary control wheel, and it gives you a second way to jump through those images. Same basic idea as this other one right here. We can invert the primary selector wheel and the ISO selector wheel that I call. We can make those invert if we wanted to during playback. Page 5, touch control. Yes, we want touch control, but if you are, for example, a very high-end sports shooter and you're doing everything with manual controls, you can come in and turn this off. So it would turn the back monitor off. And then we can clear all of the customized controls that we just went through. And that is the Olive tab. The orange tab customizations deal with fine-tuning how our camera responds to changes. For example, when we're talking about changing our exposure increments, it does it in 1/3 stops. There are people who prefer 1/2 stops. Same thing with ISO. Different tweaks in terms of how to retain our speed after using auto ISO, how we cancel auto bracketing. A lot of these are just really niche types of customizations for beginning and intermediate photographers. Most of them, I would say, don't really worry about them. If you use your bracketing a lot, you can change how the camera changes the exposure from shot to shot with an even, under, or over exposure. We can change that order. We can change the number of bracketed shots, anywhere from 3 to 7. Page 2, called Safety Shift, that we didn't turn on. I don't really use it. It's asking if the camera is shifting your highlights to be exposed properly. Do you want it to shift by shutter speed, aperture, or ISO speed? I typically leave it turned off. When you change lenses, so if you have two different lenses and you're changing them, we can turn this feature on to allow the exposure to be the same between changes. And it's asking, do you want to do it by ISO, combination of ISO and shutter speed, or just shutter speed? I don't recommend doing this. You put a new lens on there, change the settings accordingly. Auto exposure lock metering mode after focus. What this means is that when we push and hold the shutter button halfway down, especially if we're one shot, when we're pushing that halfway down and we get a focusing lock, we're also getting an exposure lock. And it's asking, when you push the shutter button halfway down, when you have a certain metering mode selected, will this lock that exposure setting? I'll leave it on evaluated for now. Going to hit OK. We can also set our shutter speed range in mechanical or electronic. So this is the full range that we can dial in without going into bulb mode. And then we also have it for electronic, up to 1/16,000th of a second. We can also select our aperture range. I just leave this here because your aperture is going to be limited by your lens. But if you wanted to limit it within a certain range, you could do it here. Third tab in the orange customization menu. The cropping information is kind of an overlay. As you're shooting, you'll get these little guidelines. Select 6x6. I'm going to tap the shutter button. Kind of hard to see. I'll turn this down. So we have these guidelines. 6x6 is a square. It doesn't crop the image. It just kind of gives you kind of a range when you're shooting to help you know what's going to be in frame depending on your aspect ratio when you go to post. We can customize the garbage can icon. So when we're deleting images, which option do you want it to give you? Let's just do it real quick. Press this. We hit the garbage can icon. You can see this highlight is on cancel. Come back out. So it's basically asking, what is the default selection when you press the garbage can icon, depending on your preference. Release shutter without lens. So if you don't have a lens on, do you want it to be able to release the shutter? If you're using a very specific type of Canon lens that can zoom in and out, do you want to retract the lens when you turn the power off? That's on. IPTC information is more metadata. We have to set this up using the EOS utility connection app. It allows us to put additional information into the camera so we can identify our images when we're shooting it. If you know what it is, this is where you set it up. If you don't worry about it. Clear all custom functions. So anything we changed or set up in the custom function orange menu, this is where we could clear it, and that is the orange tab. Finally, we have the green menu. This is my favorite menu because we've covered a ton of menu items. This allows you to customize it to just have the ones that you're interested in. So you're going to come in to add to my menu tab. And you're going to see that we can even configure additional pages in here. So I'm going to go into my menu, select items to register. Image quality is one of the ones that I do change occasionally. So I'm going to select that, hit OK, come out of the menu, and now you can see that I have image quality here. So instead of needing to search through the entire menu, you can drop items in here all the time. Another one is formatting my memory cards. Go ahead and hit OK. Focus bracketing is definitely one I use a lot. I'm going to select that. Once I have those set up, there they are, and I'm good to go. If I wanted to put them on a second page, it would do the same thing. So now I have 3 pages in here. And it would come in and repeat the process. So that is how we add items to the My Menu tab. Quick, easy, fast access for just the items that you need. Finally, there's something I want to point out real quick. Tap the shutter button. So you can see that I'm in a stills mode because we're showing the entire frame. When I flip over to video mode, we get this cropping. This is a 16:9 aspect ratio. It's typically considered the general cinema. When we come into the deep menu, once we are in the video mode, we get a few other options on this first tab, and this can be kind of confusing. I'm pointing this out because there's a couple features in here that you're going to want to know about at some point. Open gate is a term, and you can see it's not highlighted here. This is a term to record video using the entire sensor. So currently, if I flip to stills mode, you can see that we get more of the sensor showing. And when we flip to video, we get this crop. So in order to record using the entire sensor, we have to be in something that's called open gate. So for whatever reason, in XF AVS-C, which is this container that records the video, open gate doesn't like this. It wants us to be on one of these or in raw video. So let's say 420 at 10-bit. Now we have open gate and we can turn this on, tap the shutter button. And now you can see we get the full frame in the sensor. We're getting a heat warning. It's telling us that our setting has changed. So just understand that that is a requirement for open gate recording. Also, this is where we can activate raw video. This is 7K raw video, even at open gate, or we can turn that off. Just know that your raw video shooting is going to literally just eat up your memory cards in terms of space. Lots of data in there. 2,600 megabits per second. That's a huge amount of data, but incredible color grading options. You know, if you're shooting a commercial or something of that nature, you could probably handle it with, a few cards. If you're shooting a film or a movie, you're gonna need a lot of cards. Then you also run the risk of the camera overheating. Just keep that in mind. We can come in once RAW is set up and we can select our frame rate. And I believe this is a compressed RAW here. Yeah, light RAW. So here's standard RAW and light RAW. Coming back out. I just wanted to demonstrate this is where RAW and open gate recording happens. If you're just learning, starting to understand video recording, keep it here for now. It's a much smaller file size, much more straightforward, and doesn't take up as much memory space. As we move through these other tabs, a lot of these we've already covered. There are a couple new items like changing our aperture value in 1/8 increments, things of that nature. There's a couple in here that would actually be good secondary lessons like time-lapse movie self-timer. We have a pre-recording set, so you can pre-record. You can see it right here. Probably running or cycling through that little buffer, and then when we press the record button, it will have a few seconds from before we pressed that button on. Very nice. For the most part, a lot of these menu items are going to be doing exactly the same thing that we've already talked about. We have a tally lamp, so just wanted to point those out. When we're talking about gear recommendations, one of the first things you want to look at is a tripod. I like the Bogen Manfrotto carbon fibers. I have the 055. They have different variants of it now, and I like the X Pro ball head. There are tons of great companies out there. Just make sure that you invest into your tripod, into a company that is going to last you for many years. Let me give you some lens recommendations. Now, there's two different kinds of Canon lenses you're going to see. There are the EF lenses, which deal with the older DSLR mount. There's also the RF lenses, which are the newer mounts made for the mirrorless cameras. You can get an adapter that will allow you to use older EF glass on your Canon R6 Mark III. I have one, I use it all the time. Some of that glass is more affordable if these other ones are out of reach. So talking about the lenses that I really like and recommend, it's a 24-105 f4 as a walk-around general purpose shooter. On the wide side, I like the 14-35 f4. If you can afford it, the 15-35 2.8. Both of those lenses have far more wide focal lengths to allow you to shoot landscapes. If you're a sports shooter on a budget, take a look at the 100-400 RF. It's a great way to get into sports or wildlife shooting if you're on a tight budget. I like the 100-500 RF. This is my main safari lens when I am shooting in Africa. Canon also makes these very intriguing, what I call daylight lenses. They're a little bit more affordable. There's the 600 f11 and the 800 f11. Small aperture, but if you have enough daylight, they're pretty impressive. Out of those two, I actually prefer the 600 f11. If you have enough money, the holy grail, in my opinion, is the 28-70 f2. Holy cow. What an amazing lens. Canon also makes a ton of amazing primes. For example, if you get into macro photography, the 100 RF macro is amazing. At some point, you are going to be ready for your first camera filters. And as you know through this video, I am the creator of Maven filters. These are color-coded, award-winning, and patented. You are absolutely going to love them. They're magnetic. They allow you to identify and use your filters instantly. Again, I am Michael the Maven, and I want to say thank you so much for trusting me with your instruction. I hope you found it useful. Come back anytime, and be sure to check us out in the Facebook group. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.